On a Monday morning, April 9th, 2018, the peace is interrupted when police receive a call from a worried citizen.
Watcher Police.
Yes, this is Howard Leisure. My aunt lives on Portage Street. A friend of ours stopped over there yesterday to check on her, and she was nowhere to be found.
Okay.
There's papers around the porch for the last 3 days.
What's their name?
Margaret Douglas.
Initially, the police department was contacted about Margaret being missing from her home.
We don't know where she's at. She's 98 years old.
Does she live there by herself?
She lives there by herself, yeah. And she never locks her house.
So our initial response was to look for Margaret to see if she had fallen inside her home and needed help. Patrol officers walked through it, yelling for her to see if she would answer.
We continued to canvass the neighborhood, and we did not locate her.
If her close friends, she's not with them, something's wrong.
We contacted area hospitals and looked in any possible place that she could be.
Margaret was just basically missing.
That evening, Howard and his wife, Cindy, head to Margaret's home to help police with the search.
They asked if we could come down and meet them at the house.
Howard and Cindy started to look for some items common for Margaret to have taken with her when she left. There were specific shoes that she would wear. They were looking for a little red wallet that she carried her money and her credit cards in when she left the home.
So Howard went to look in that front closet.
The clothes had dropped or slipped down that was piled in the top of the closet.
He said, "Oh, I found her shoe." He tried to pull the shoe out.
And I touched it, and it felt cold and clammy.
The shoe was still attached to Margaret, who was in the closet.
And I thought, oh my Lord, it's her. And I pretty much lost it. Something I'll never forget. I'm sorry. But to find her like that.
It was a terrible shock, especially for her nephew Howard, and I just remember the look on his face.
I actually thought I was going to get sick. I think we were just so appalled and shocked that someone would kill her.
What motive could there be to kill a 98-year-old woman? What could she have done to anybody that would have resulted in that?
Margaret's home is declared a crime scene, and homicide detectives arrive.
Margaret was positioned with her head down in the corner and her backside kind of up in the air. Her underpants were torn inside the closet there. Her nightgown was all unsnapped, and her bra was pulled up. I immediately thought that there was a sexual element to the crime. There was a lot of trauma to Margaret's neck region. Somebody was able to strangle her, and my assumption was manually due to the lack of any ligature marks.
Looking at the condition of Margaret's body, rigor came and gone. You could look at the different lividity and the pulling of the blood inside the body to see it appeared she had been there for a few days.
As the forensics team gathers DNA and fingerprints, detectives search the house for further evidence.
Her wallet was not located, so that gave us an indication that maybe this was a burglary and they had made off with just the wallet. Margaret didn't always lock her doors, so we weren't surprised when we didn't find forced entry into her home.
Investigators find their first clue outside the home.
I observed a plastic food service glove on the back side of the house and collected the glove just in case that it was involved.
There was not a lot of physical evidence at the crime scene. Besides the glove, the missing wallet was something, but nothing that would direct us in a certain way.
Who would attack and kill a 98-year-old woman in her own home? As they set out for answers, detectives turn to Howard and Cindy to learn more about Margaret.
The best thing to do is to get to know your victim as best you can.
Born in Akron, Ohio in 1919, Margaret was known as a woman of strong character with a fiercely independent streak.
She knew what she wanted, and she wasn't afraid to go after what she wanted to get.
Margaret often told us about her days working at the O'Neill's in downtown Akron. She liked being out. She liked being around people.
She was very friendly, very outgoing.
Margaret had very strong opinions, and she was certainly not afraid to tell you what her opinion was.
She was a pretty independent woman, let's put it that way.
After World War II, Margaret married the love of her life, Army veteran Donald Douglas.
If I saw Margaret, I saw Donald, her husband. They were made for each other. They just complemented each other.
The couple moved into the house that Margaret would live in for the rest of her life.
I think Margaret might have lived in that neighborhood close to 70 years.
It was Margaret and Donald's choice not to have any children, and they seemed extremely happy together.
They liked to travel together. They went to ball games. They enjoyed going to the Indians game.
When Donald passed away in the year 2000, Margaret chose to remain in her house, surrounded by friends and caring neighbors.
Margaret was a pretty good friend with the neighbors, David and his wife.
There was another neighbor across the street. Her name was Jan. They just sort of kept an eye on Margaret.
She knew all the kids in the neighborhood. But as she got older, she's got more restricted to the house. And that's when me and my wife stepped in at that point and started taking her shopping and doing things for her as needed.
Margaret loved the fact that she was 98 years old, and she wanted to be 100. She truly loved life.
For someone to have lived such a wonderful, vibrant life, only to be snuffed out in such a way is just horrific. I have a grandmother that's similar in age. It's just very hit close to home.
The investigators were under a tremendous amount of pressure. Every one of them took it very personally, and I think every one of them wanted to find justice very quickly for the family.
At the onset, we had no clue. There was no direction.
Maybe it's financial. Maybe it was a relationship issue. Maybe it was an argument that went too far and something happened that they didn't expect. But at that stage in the investigation, you just don't know.
We need to start somewhere, so we start closest to her.
So that would include looking at Howard and Cindy.
We definitely leave everyone on the list until we can exclusively rule them out and have that be a certainty and not just a feeling.
Coming up, is Margaret's killer hiding in plain sight?
He knew details of where Margaret was found and in what state she was found.
He's come back to the scene of a crime.
Detectives unearth dark secrets.
We found a journal about a desire to kill people.
He was videotaping her while she slept, stalking his victim like an animal stalks its prey.
Leading to a killer no one saw coming.
This is somebody that's ultimately going to be a serial killer if he's not caught.
Police are investigating the murder of 98-year-old Margaret Douglas, whose body was discovered stuffed in a closet in her own home.
I just can't imagine a 98-year-old woman being that terrified and not knowing what to do. It's definitely one of the most traumatic things I've ever had to experience in my years with the Wadsworth Police Department.
Detectives begin by interviewing those closest to Margaret, her nephew Howard, and his wife Cindy.
We fingerprint and get DNA from Cindy and Howard to show whether their fingerprints or DNA were on something that it should not have been on. We did subpoenas for phone records and also location data, GPS data, so we could tell their whereabouts during the time in question. Cindy and Howard lived approximately 30 or 40-minute drive away, but they would come into town a couple times a month to do her grocery shopping.
She always paid with cash. We swung down, went to the bank. She threw $200 out to go shopping with.
Police ask Howard about Margaret's finances. Was there anyone who stood to gain from her death?
Margaret was really in charge of her own finances. We did look into those accounts and check for activity. We were never able to locate any activity that was out of the normal.
Does she have a power of attorney or a will or anything then?
No. We've been telling her she needs a will, she needs this.
she would never get to take the time to do it.
There was nobody that we could find that would have any financial gain from her death.
Could Howard or Cindy think of anyone who might wish to harm Margaret?
Any problems with her? Did she want to argue with people or anything like that? Nothing?
No, sweet old lady.
And nobody else, she didn't, have any problems with anybody that...
Not that I know of. She was... Margaret often milked. That's why it's so just horrible.
Detectives ask about others in close contact with Margaret. According to Howard and Cindy, the closest is Margaret's former neighbor, David Klinkenbeard.
Cindy and Howard did keep in contact with David, who was Margaret's main caregiver. David would come and check on her a couple of times a week just to see if she was okay and if she needed anything.
David has the most contact with her.
Yeah, he'd go every week, take her trash out, and then he'd put the can back in the next day. So.
After interviewing Howard and Cindy, detectives try to contact David, but he's not answering their calls.
There was some concern not being able to reach David, and that was troubling. We didn't have any other suspects. It made us wonder what was going on.
As detectives try to track David down, patrol officers continue to canvass Margaret's neighbors for information.
During the canvass, we did learn that there had been some vehicles in the neighborhood that had been rifled through, and small items were taken out, like change and things like that.
Is this somebody that was up by Margaret's house and found a crime of opportunity because it's somebody that they can maybe figure out lives alone?
As the canvass continues, officers notice someone watching the activity around Margaret's house.
I noticed a man outside smoking a cigarette, so I went out to make contact with him. This person ended up being David Klinkenbeard. He said that he used to live next door to Margaret. He kind of wanted to know what was going on.
He said he was essentially canvassing the neighborhood looking for anything that was suspicious.
David did strike me as odd at first. It was concerning to me that he was standing out there trying to determine what exactly we had found.
As David continues to talk, police grow increasingly suspicious.
He was kind of making comments about information that seemed strange that he would know about.
He knew details of where Margaret was found and in what state she was found. Having people know how she was found and even what she was wearing is very suspicious. You don't know where someone has gotten their information. Were they there? Were they involved in the murder?
With a growing list of questions about David, officers approach Margaret's neighbors for answers.
One of the neighbors had mentioned how they had seen David driving through the neighborhood, but didn't stop, just kind of drove through. So they thought that was kind of strange. Maybe he's come back to the scene of a crime, whether he's driving back by because he knows what he did and he's having remorse, or maybe trying to get back inside there to get her body out of there and get rid of it, or to look to see if he left anything behind.
David told some of the neighbors that his fingerprints would be all over the house and he would have to get his fingerprints taken, which is not something that people usually say or think.
The next day, David's appearance in local news coverage of the murder raises further alarm bells.
I turned on the news and there he is on TV, talking to the reporters, putting himself out there.
Was this a guilty man's ploy to hide in plain sight?
That seemed out of sorts to us. Generally, when people are grieving a loss, their instinct is not to cooperate with the media, but David seemed very willing to speak with them.
All of these things added together are possible indicators of someone who is purposely trying to insert themselves in the investigation because they're involved in this investigation.
Could David have possibly been involved in Margaret's murder?
At that point, we had some questions about his actions and his knowledge of how Margaret was found.
He definitely became a main point of interest.
On April 11th, 2 days after finding Margaret's body in her own home, police bring her former neighbor, David Klinkenbeard, in for questioning.
David told us that he last saw Margaret when he was helping her with her trash can on Wednesday.
You didn't come by on Thursday or Friday, not till Sunday.
No, not till Sunday.
On Sunday, he had gone over to the house and he didn't locate her. He had some concerns that maybe she was upstairs in a state of undress and he didn't want to go up there himself. So he contacted Jan across the street.
And that's when you had Jan come over in case she was upstairs and not decent.
Yeah. Jan went up there and she wasn't up there. And then we looked in the closet up there.
Okay, your friend's missing. That'd be the last thing in your mind, whether they're dressed or not. You would go and look for them throughout the entire house, not go get somebody else.
As the interview continues, David's answers only raise further suspicion.
She likes to look nice. And she was a pretty woman.
Yeah.
When she was younger, she was a redhead.
Oh.
Yeah. And she was really, back then, she was really kind of like, not thin, but, you know, I was surprised because she looked back then.
Some of the comments that he made about Margaret, in particular her physical appearance when she was younger, she had just been murdered, and here he is describing her figure and her body type in an interview.
The detective asked David about the calls he made when he couldn't find Margaret.
Oh, I want to use my cell phone to call Pop. I got his number on my phone.
Do you have your phone with you?
Yeah.
Would you mind if I had my computer guy just go through and write down the dates of your calls?
He said he must have left it at home and didn't have it on his person.
It seems strange because, in this day and age, nobody goes anywhere without their cell phone. Their cell phone is always on them.
Investigators must now subpoena David's cell phone records. At the same time, they receive a forensics report from the crime scene.
DNA belonging to Margaret was found on the glove that was discovered outside of Margaret's house.
We believe that the suspect's DNA was on the inside of the glove.
Would you mind if I was able to get a sample of your DNA? We know you're supposed to be in the house. Would that be okay with you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Detectives send David's DNA to compare against that found inside the glove. While they wait for the results, they check David's cell phone data to verify his alibi.
We were able to go through his day-to-day life and see that he likely was not involved, but there was no concrete evidence that we were able to bring to light.
Unlike the phone records, the DNA findings are conclusive. David is not Margaret's killer.
David ended up being, in the end of all this thing, just a friend of hers that was not involved at all.
Sometimes he would say things that didn't really have an explanation. It just took the time and the effort to understand his involvement, and there was reasonable explanation for all of the things that we had concerns about. He just really cared about Margaret and really had concern that he would have an answer as to what happened.
We had to look at David as probably our number one interest because obviously his strange comments in the beginning about his DNA and fingerprints, plus he's the one that saw her on a regular basis.
Up until that point where you reach a crossroads, you really do have to look at every tiny detail, every possibility.
Detectives turn their attention to the autopsy report, which paints a terrifying picture of Margaret's last moments.
The medical examiner's report on Margaret showed what kind of force was used to kill her in the end. She had contusions to her head, to her face. She had a fracture to her orbital socket. She had a fracture to her C7 vertebrae in her neck. It showed there was a compression there, which broke her neck.
Margaret was not a frail woman. Not just anyone would be able to manually strangle her.
While the autopsy finds no direct evidence of sexual assault, officers continue to suspect otherwise.
Why would her underwear be ripped off of her? They weren't like pulled off, they were torn.
There were other bodily fluids that were mixed in with the swabs from Margaret's body.
The fact that someone took Margaret in such a horrific manner was a very difficult thing to handle.
As homicide detectives regroup to search for new leads, patrol officers alert them to an unusual crime reported in the early morning hours of April 8th, the day before Margaret's body is discovered.
There was a report of a carjacking very near the scene of Margaret Douglas's home. In a community like Wadsworth, we don't have carjackings. That's not a normal call for us.
They happened in such time close to one another that we had to wonder if they were related.
The carjacking victim is a local man named Paul Shalott.
Paul had reported he was driving along and he happened to notice a 19, 20-year-old man limping, like having trouble walking up the street.
Paul had reported to us that he was just being a good Samaritan and picking somebody up that he thought to be injured.
So as he went out to help him, he said the gentleman just slid into the driver's seat and then locked the doors, wouldn't let him in, and took off with his car.
Officers grow suspicious when they quickly locate Paul's car near the site of the carjacking.
The car was found very quickly, and it was found right there in the same area it was taken.
Literally, like, not even a block away from where he had picked this gentleman up, supposedly, and lost his car.
This happened at a building that had cameras on the outside, so we wanted to kind of investigate Paul's story because it just didn't seem quite right. You could see on the video that Paul had been with what appeared to be a young man. The young man was not limping. He did not seem to be injured in any way.
Paul's initial report did not match anything that video said. It just wasn't adding up. He was not being honest and something else was going on.
Why had Paul lied to police? And who was the young man seen in security footage? Had one of them gone on to do something unthinkable?
We had the carjacking, and then we had Mark's disappearance. It just started making me think a little bit. Could this be the guy that could be involved?
Police investigating the murder of 98-year-old Margaret Douglas have a potential new lead after learning of an alleged carjacking in her quiet neighborhood.
Somebody that's willing to perpetrate a crime such as a carjacking makes you really wonder, is this related to a murder that's just happened a couple blocks away?
But when security video proves the victim, Paul Shalott, has lied to police, detectives demand answers.
When I interviewed Paul to get the whole story, he was very nervous, and then he finally started telling us the truth about how he came to be in that area and what really happened. He was on an app trying to meet somebody, and he did come across somebody. He said he worked for a church, and he didn't want them to find out that he's using a site to try to meet up with young men. He didn't want to admit it right away, but they started getting involved sexually in the car. The male subject he picked up, I guess, started getting upset that things weren't going his way.
The young man that he met up with just kind of snapped and took the car, not what Paul had expected when he met this person online.
With Paul finally being honest, detectives change course and ask if he knows anything about the murder of Margaret Douglas.
He was aware of what had happened and that she was a victim of a homicide. But Paul did not know Margaret at all.
He had no ties to her, and real no ties even in that neighborhood. He was just there basically to meet up with somebody that night. Then I started thinking, well, now we need to know who was driving that car, who carjacked him.
Paul was asked for the account information for the app that he used to meet this person on.
He said he couldn't remember the email he used or the password he used to get in there.
Paul was embarrassed about what he had let happen and the fact that he was involved with a young man. He had deleted everything from his phone that was relative to that. We weren't able to recover any of that information.
So we had no way of proving or figuring out who it was that he may have met up with that night.
After hitting another dead lead, frustrated investigators know that public fear is only growing.
There was definitely some fear. There were people that would normally stroll down the street, walk their dogs, let their kids play outside unsupervised, and things like that weren't happening after Margaret's discovery.
And the emotions for everybody were really high and heightened. They're all locking their doors now, and they're really watching for everything. So it was definitely a shock to all of them.
With the community on edge, Margaret's family continues to struggle with their loss.
The hardest part going through all this Is it time-consuming and the worrying and waiting for the outcome and you're not sure what's going to happen?
That was hard. You know, none of us are patient. And we all want to know what happened here, why someone would do this.
The reason you're doing what you're doing is for the victim. You want somebody to be held responsible for what they've done.
Believing that the carjacker may be a serial criminal, police take a closer look at the petty crimes reported around Margaret's neighborhood.
The crimes all took place in just a few block area.
Is there somebody in this neighborhood that's committing a whole bunch of crimes for some reason, because we weren't seeing those crimes spreading out throughout the city like we typically would?
You have to wonder if the person who's committing these petty crimes has escalated to commit something more horrific.
On the night of April 13th, 4 days after the discovery of Margaret's body, police received several calls about two young men.
We had received a lot of different calls where people had seen two male subjects running around, creating mischief, doing things at the park, doing things at the church, and in cars.
A couple of young males were taking some type of device that had wheels on the bottom and hanging out in one of the parking lots.
That same night, police respond to a call that changes everything.
It was reported to us that there had been a break-in to a trailer that was at a construction site.
When officers investigate, they get a huge break.
Someone had left their cell phone behind at the trailer.
Does the phone belong to the person responsible for the neighborhood crime spree, including Margaret's murder? Investigators used forensic software to unlock the phone.
The phone came back to a subject that we had been known in our area for different car break-ins and little thefts from cars that happened in our city and especially over in that area.
He was identified by one of our officers as Zach Franzen. Zach was known to us, and he did have a troubled past. He had been in some more serious trouble, and we were all familiar with him. At this point, we thought that we really needed to bring Zach in and talk to him about what he had been doing that night. Zach was found sleeping in his car at the high school in the parking lot.
As officers bring Zach into the station for an interview, something immediately catches their attention.
Zach had some scratches on his legs, which made me wonder where those came from.
Are they defensive wounds from somebody fighting back against you and scratching you that way? Could they be from something simple, explainable, or evidence into what we were looking into with regards to Margaret Douglas?
Police investigating the murder of Margaret Douglas have connected local teen Zach Franzen to a spate of crimes near her home.
With the carjacking, we know there was supposed to be a young male. Now we have Zach running around, committing these little crimes, all within the same area around the same time frame.
His phone was left behind at the trailer, so we knew for sure that he was involved in the crimes that were all seemingly tied together.
Detectives cut to the chase and ask Zach if he killed Margaret Douglas.
Zach, he owned up for the little things he did, but he denied any knowledge of it or being involved at all.
Detectives steer the interview to the identity of the teen seen with Zach in security footage.
He said that he was out with his friend Gavin Ramsey, and that everything that had happened was all Gavin's idea. Gavin had been the one that was trying to break into the trailer, and that he was just standing by and watching it happen, just a presence during the time that Gavin was committing all the other petty crimes. Zach was definitely distancing himself, so there was some concern that he wasn't being honest about everything that they had done.
For the moment, police decide not to charge Zach until they interview his friend, Gavin Ramsey.
Gavin had been in trouble before, and his mom had dealt with that. She was going to hold him accountable for the things he had done. We talked about a trailer, and I just let him know that we knew he was there because Zach had told us that he was there. Property-type crimes and less serious crimes is what we talked about at first.
That's just to see, is he going to own up to that? And then we'd continue from there into something more serious.
You guys didn't take anything? Did you rummage through glove boxes or anything?
Maybe like 50 cents, but other than that, seriously nothing.
He admitted to all of them. He would rifle through cars and take things that weren't of a lot of value, just to take things.
Gavin told us during the interview he does it for a rush, so it wasn't about money or anything.
I think the reason that he was so willing to admit to these lesser offenses is to kind of distance himself and clear his name from anything else I might want to talk to him about.
Now, detectives turn their questions to more serious crimes.
We had a carjacking.
Oh my God.
And the suspect is a young white male with a nice complexion and blue eyes. Is that you?
Gavin's demeanor changed substantially when I started to ask him about the carjacking.
Doesn't upset me so much. Is there something else you need to tell us?
You've already gotten yourself in trouble, so.
I know, and I don't mean I don't know what to say.
Before answering further questions, Gavin asks to speak with a detective alone.
Honestly, can you two actually speak for a second?
What's that?
Can you two actually speak? So I can talk to her.
Yeah.
Sure.
So when his mom stepped out,
The carjacking, it was me, I'm going to be honest about it, but the way that he explained it, that guy, that's not right.
he openly admitted that he was the one who did the carjacking. But he didn't really want to talk about the sexual part of what happened in there.
You guys didn't talk about what kind of sex you were going to have, or...
No, I don't know, it's not something I'm interested in, just the act of him getting the payback, I guess, I don't know, that's, like, it's karma, really. Like, if you're gonna do that, then I'm gonna rob you.
Gavin denies that he was truly interested in meeting up with Paul for any reason other than to catfish him or to teach him a lesson.
This is a kid that's admitting to going around breaking into cars, and it's not for theft, it's for a rush, so we know he's after the adrenaline. What else could he have possibly done?
With Gavin admitting to the carjacking, the interview turns to questions about Margaret Douglas.
I specifically asked him if he had murdered Margaret, and he denied it.
There's no reason that we would find your DNA inside her house, because we swabbed the hell out of that house.
You shouldn't.
I mean, if you've never been in there, then obviously you wouldn't. But, I mean, you name it. We swabbed it, we took it. I'm sure you know we were there all night.
Yeah.
He was hiding something. There was more to be said. I didn't feel that this avenue had been exhausted with him. This was something that we probably needed to revisit, maybe from another direction.
For now, detectives allow Gavin to leave with his mother.
At this point, we have nothing other than the petty crimes, which are handled through juvenile court, so we wouldn't actually take him into custody to hold him.
But they have one request for Gavin's mother.
I let her know that we had concerns and that I would like to look at his phone. I was expecting to find information about how maybe Gavin was victimized.
Instead, what officers find on Gavin's phone changes everything.
Officer Cooper discovered Google-type searches, murder in Wadsworth, Margaret Douglas investigation, Wadsworth PD reports on homicide investigation.
Then, detectives find something they never would have imagined.
There were actually photos and videos of Margaret Douglas.
Timestamps show that the images were recorded in the early morning hours of Friday, April 6th.
She obviously didn't know he was there, and he was just photographing her from a vantage point in her own home. There was clearly a point in time where she realized that someone was in her home and was startled.
Nothing can prepare investigators for what they see next.
I was absolutely shocked that a child could imagine doing this to another human being. This wasn't a horror movie. This was actually happening.
Detectives investigating the murder of 98-year-old Margaret Douglas have found disturbing evidence on a phone belonging to 17-year-old Gavin Ramsey.
The first thought in my mind was, he knows we're going to discover this. And I could just imagine him fleeing.
Police moved quickly to take Gavin into custody.
Once we picked him up, I briefly told his mom that we had discovered evidence on his phone and that we were going to take him back to the police department. It was definitely not the easiest interview that I had ever done.
I came up onto the porch, and I didn't even know what I was going to do. I don't know, I felt like going into the house is like the biggest adrenaline rush I could get. So then I tried the doorknob, and that just happened to be unlocked.
He was videotaping her while she slept, stalking his victim like an animal stalks its prey.
So how long do you think you were in the house before you woke her up?
I don't know, probably like 10, 15 minutes.
You could see in some of the photos the obvious horror on her face as to what was happening.
And then from the time you woke her up to the time you ended up on top of her choking her, how long did that whole part take?
That was probably like 5 minutes.
He had used both hands to squeeze her neck and push her neck back against the floor, strangling her. He said that once he realized the gravity of what he was doing, it was too late, that she was already gone.
For officers, the most disturbing questions involve what Gavin did after killing Margaret.
When I saw him, it was just like, this is sick. This is not a normal murder.
The sexual nature of his actions was kind of a topic that he was not willing to talk about.
He degraded her by using her for sexual things and videotaping and taking pictures. He'd actually been in there with her for a while.
And then I checked my phone, and it said it was like 4 something, and I knew my mom had to get up at 5:04.
So he takes the body, finds the closet, because he has to get home. He throws in there to hide her because I don't want anybody to find her. I don't want anybody to know it's me.
But was Margaret simply a random victim of Gavin's need for a rush? Or had he known her better than he'd initially let on?
Gavin lived very close to Margaret Douglas, right around the corner from her house.
Gavin had actually been to her house before, asking her about maybe cutting her grass, raking leaves, or even shoveling snow. He was out looking for little odd jobs around the neighborhood.
The thought in the back of my mind was that Gavin had observed Margaret regularly and actually thought about the things that he would like to do and that she would make a good victim.
Police arrest Gavin Ramsey for the murder of Margaret Douglas and get a search warrant for his bedroom.
We found gloves matching the same style and type of glove that was found at the scene.
In one of his drawers, I discovered Margaret's red wallet.
Detectives then make an even more disturbing find.
We also found a journal that had some writings about fantasies about murder. He had written almost like a book report on different serial killers. After reading those, there was no doubt in my mind that Gavin would kill again if he had the opportunity. This is something that he enjoys, that he finds pleasure in.
This is somebody that's ultimately going to be a serial killer if he's not caught.
Because of the heinous nature of the crime, the juvenile penal system is not equipped to deal with an individual such as Gavin Ramsey.
Gavin was ultimately charged as an adult with aggravated murder, 2 other counts of murder, burglary, and abuse of a corpse.
We requested that Mr. Ramsey receive the harshest penalty that the law would allow.
Found guilty on all charges, Gavin is sentenced to life in prison without parole for the murder of Margaret Douglas.
When I watched Gavin Ramsey at the sentencing, I still felt in my mind that he doesn't understand the gravity of what he's done. There's still no remorse there.
You would like to think that the world is full of people like you and I, and don't want to think that of such a young person able to act out something that you would only see in a horror movie.
I was shocked to find out that it was a young person who was still in high school that would do something like this.
To murder somebody who's 98 years old, to think you could shove a body in that closet. I just can't even.
It absolutely made me think of my own grandma. I just could not imagine her living such a wonderful life and having it end in such a horrific way.
Despite the horror of Margaret's death, her family honors her memory by thinking of her remarkable life.
Margaret gave you an inspiration that you can still be 98 years old and be very functional, live in your own home, take care of yourself. She, to me, was just an inspiration.
She led a full life and could have been longer.
Margaret would want to be remembered as the person who took care of herself, cared about those around her, and was willing to do what she needed to do.
My aunt was Margaret Douglas, and she was a wonderful woman. She was a great woman.
A woman devoted to her town.
She was the deputy county treasurer. Away from the courthouse, you saw a different person. She loved to dance.
Her life snuffed out in a savage attack.
There was quite a bit of blood. She had been beaten pretty severely.
She had to have been terrified. She struggled at the end of her life.
She had no enemies. Nobody had a clue who would do something like that.
Police investigate several troubling theories.
Is it a close friend that got into an argument with her?
There had been some shouting matches.
Maybe she interrupted a burglary or a theft.
After months of false leads and dead ends,
the town was on high alert.
A stunning discovery breaks open the case.
It added a new twist to the crime.
All of a sudden you realize, maybe I don't know all my neighbors.
And points to a murderer in their midst.
I was kind of speechless at first.
I thought, my gosh. I mean, you just can't believe it.
The tiny farming community of Colon, Nebraska is one of the smallest towns in America, with a population of just over 100 people.
Colon, Nebraska is a very laid-back community, very close-knit families there. I think that if you went there, you would drive through and you go, oh, this is small.
Many people would leave their doors unlocked, their cars unlocked, keys left in the ignition, just a feel of safety, that there's no threat.
But then on June 30th, 2003, police receive a distressing call.
Around 6:42 in the evening, dispatch indicated to me that they had received a report of a possible suicide.
My friend ended up finding her body across the street in her garage, along with a gun.
He had called 911, and it was reported as a suicide. Once I arrived, the firemen on scene already were pointing me to a garage. I walked in and could see the body of a white female that was laying on the ground. There was quite a bit of blood, and there was disfigurement to the head and face area, so we could not recognize the victim. A black handgun was found near her head.
There is so much blood on the scene, investigators aren't able to determine the cause of death and need to wait for an autopsy to be sure.
The small black handgun didn't actually contain bullets, and we didn't find any shell casings in the area. The car had a smear on the driver's side, and then I did find that there was a smear of what appeared to be blood on the walk-in door that went out the side of the garage.
There was also what looked like blood spatter, where someone stepped in the pool of blood.
There was a footprint impression that was taken
that indicated that there was a second person there. This was a suspicious death.
There were DNA swabs taken on her body and of her clothing that she was wearing at the time. We noticed that her purse was located underneath her vehicle.
Was this just a botched burglary, or did the person have some other intention?
From the personal items in her purse, police identify the victim as 66-year-old Sharon Erickson.
Sharon was very well known. It was shocking to us as law enforcement to see somebody that was a fixture in the community being the victim in this case.
Born and raised in Nebraska's farm country, Sharon Erickson was a lifelong government worker.
Sharon worked across the hall from me. She was the deputy county treasurer. She was excellent, very honest. I would put her against anybody in the state of Nebraska for knowledge when it comes to the office of the treasurer. She would do anything for you. Gosh darn. When it came to the office or anything, she was always attendant and very, very helpful always.
In 1998, after 37 years of devoted service, Sharon retired.
Away from the courthouse, you saw a different person, more relaxed. She loved to dance, and if anyone wanted to dance, boom, she was on the dance floor. And boy, she was so good at dancing. I'm telling you what, boy, she could dance every dance until they'd shut the music off.
As a single woman, Sharon lived alone, but saw the people of Colon as her family.
People used to go to the bar and have coffee. Well, that one closed. Sharon came over and she says, I have a little front room in my house there. Would you come and remodel it and paint it for me? She had me fix that room up and gave the locals a key for coffee. Had a coffee pot in there. It was just somewhere where they could go. She didn't charge them. That's the type of person that you're talking about.
Police are at a loss when they realize Sharon was attacked just 50 feet away from the gathering spot she gifted to the town. Who could have wanted to kill her and why? Detectives expand their search for evidence to Sharon's home.
She lived in what used to be a grocery store and had converted to her house.
The other odd thing about Sharon's residence is that her garage was located across her house, and so to get to her car, she would have to walk out the front of her house and across Main Street.
What or who could have lured Sharon out of her home and to her death in the garage?
That we did find some damage to the back door that appeared to be consistent with some forced entry.
There was a coal chisel that was found next to the door that more than likely was used.
We also did find that the phone line had been cut.
There was at least some planning on the attack. Someone was obviously trying to prevent her from calling for help.
Inside, there was nothing out of place. When we started going room by room, we found that there was a holster for a small gun in her bedroom near the bed, and the gun was missing. That, along with her bed not being made and the back door having damage and being pried open, we started to have a picture in our minds that this may have occurred in the middle of the night.
Our assumption was that there was a burglary. She was alerted to the burglary because of noise coming from the person prying on the back door, that she got up out of bed, grabbed her gun, and went to investigate what was occurring before she was killed.
As investigators continue to process the scene, they are interrupted by volunteer firefighter and village postmaster Rick Hartman.
He was friends with Sharon. He actually was the one that found her body.
Mr. Hartman appeared to be a little more interested in the situation than some of the other firefighters that were there. Mr. Hartman had to be asked on several different occasions to stay behind the crime scene tape.
After it kept happening, it really alerted a lot of us to, why does he keep doing this? Is there something else going on? Is there something wrong?
Rick's behavior makes officers immediately suspicious, so they approach him for an interview on site.
During the interview, Mr. Hartman had indicated that he was really close friends with Sharon.
When Sharon would leave town, she would leave a key in her post office box for him to check on her house. So he was trusted by her.
Sharon would come visit him every day when she'd come pick up her mail.
But Rick tells police he didn't see Sharon that morning. He was asked to check on her after a worried relative didn't hear from Sharon that evening.
Rick Hartman, he had gone looking for Sharon. Sharon was nowhere to be found.
Mr. Hartman opened the garage door, and you could see Sharon laying beside her car.
Without prompting, he indicated that it was a suicide, that she had a gun, knew how to use it. But we were very confident that there was foul play involved.
When Rick is asked to make a formal statement, his demeanor abruptly changes.
He said, if you're going to arrest me, otherwise I'm leaving. I was taken aback.
Why would he say that? Why would he do that?
We need to look a little harder at this person and find out what that was all about.
Coming up, new evidence reveals a disturbing detail.
She'd been sexually assaulted. I was definitely shocked.
Small-town gossip sparks salacious rumors.
There may have been more than just a friendship there.
He was trying to hide additional evidence.
And just when detectives think they have the killer in their sights,
It had to be him.
a startling truth is revealed.
It sent shockwaves through the entire area.
I went, what? You've got to be kidding me.
Police investigating the murder of Sharon Erickson are speaking to her close friend, Rick Hartman. But when they ask him for a statement, Rick suddenly ends the interview.
He was upset that he couldn't leave, and finally just told the investigators that I'm going to leave, and if you want to arrest me, go ahead and arrest me.
That was pretty out of character and uncharacteristic for somebody who had a friend that was just killed. So that immediately caused investigators some concern.
His statements and odd behavior really pointed us in a direction towards the postmaster.
Mr. Hartman gave his alibi. He was at home with his family, and that was confirmed by his wife.
Rick never had any criminal record or had done anything wrong, so there wasn't a great deal of focus on him any more than anybody else.
Rick's on the back burner for now, but investigators will keep him in their sights.
We didn't want to rule anybody out specifically, but we wanted to cast a wide net.
While investigators consider their next move, news of the murder, the first one in 40 years, travels fast.
The town of Colon was buzzing. Well, I got calls, bang, bang, bang. I can't remember who called first. I went, what? That's all I went, and I just was dumbfounded. I mean, I just couldn't believe it. When you hear of someone that you know and you knew for 25, 30 years, it's devastating. Everyone's just shaking their heads saying, how can this happen? How can this happen?
Sharon's death was a big loss for our community. She had known so many people. through her work, through her friends, and to not have her in the community anymore, that always creates a hole. Everybody spoke well of her.
She was beloved by the people in the community. We didn't know where to start looking, so we tried to determine anything potentially that could have happened. Is it a close friend that got into an argument with her? Is it a neighbor that maybe didn't like her?
The day after the murder, police canvassed Sharon's neighborhood.
They questioned almost everybody that knew Sharon about, have you heard anything? Do you have any information that can help us? And I said, I have no idea. No idea. She had no enemies. Nobody had a clue who would do something like that. It has to be someone that we don't know. I mean, it has to be someone that came from town.
While we don't have a lot of violent crime in the area, there was definitely one family that lived right behind Sharon that came to mind as somebody that could have been concerning.
The investigators had made contact with Jim Mars. He was an individual that would get into trouble here and there.
He wasn't real responsible. He associated with people that were involved in minor crimes such as burglaries, drug use.
I asked what his relationship with Sharon was, and basically it was just an acquaintance. Mr. Mars would see her occasionally outside of her house when he was going to the post office or on Main Street. They would say hi. He said he got in trouble by her a couple times for mischief when he was younger, and she would yell at him.
When we interviewed Jim Mars, he didn't know anything about Sharon's death, and he was so sorry that she died.
Jim had been in Kansas doing a roofing job. After he got back from Kansas, he eventually went to Wahoo, drank some beer with a friend, attempted to go to another bar. At that time, it was after closing time, and he drove the back roads home to Colon. He estimated he got home about 1:30 in the morning. Stayed up, watched TV, drank a pop, and then eventually went to bed.
His mom confirmed the time that he came home. Everything seemed to be okay with his story.
Investigators don't know the exact time of Sharon's death, so the 24-year-old remains on the suspect list. Before police leave, Jim gives them a tip.
Jim had indicated that there was a trucker that always had interactions and always seemed to be bickering with Miss Erickson. The truck driver may have parked a little bit on her property and she'd get upset about it. He might have his engine running on his truck and it would bother her.
She would bring it to his attention, and he would not necessarily comply with her request.
It was no secret the two didn't get along.
We were gaining information from friends that Sharon had had disputes with this man.
Detectives must now determine if a run-in with the trucker turned fatal.
A lot of the community members felt that the truck driver was doing things to antagonize her and to cause more problems between them.
That was something that was public because there had been some shouting matches, some vocal exchanges about the fact that this truck was running all night.
Some of the people in the community who knew that he wasn't overly fond with Sharon, they kind of rumored him to be a suspect.
Maybe the frustration amongst the two had just finally boiled over. It just seemed suspicious.
I know the investigators had attempted to reach out to the truck driver in question and were unable to contact him.
Police do all they can, but can't track down the driver's whereabouts.
Today's technology is there's cameras everywhere. You're using your cell phone. At the time of this homicide, that kind of technology wasn't prevalent.
We didn't know if we were going to find that person.
Is Sharon Erickson's murderer on the run?
That's concerning. That was on the minds of probably all the citizens in this area. And probably the scariest thing for law enforcement in the community is that person likely to offend again?
Police hunting the killer of 66-year-old Sharon Erickson have a new suspect, a truck driver she had clashed with several times.
Had something escalated from vocal argument to some other level.
Now, detectives fear the trucker has fled the area.
We went door to door, asked people if they saw the truck driver. No one had any information about him, and it didn't appear we were any further along than we were the night we got there, and the town was on high alert.
There's a murderer out there. It's hard to contemplate. Hard to contemplate.
A week after Sharon's murder, detectives received the autopsy results.
The report did indicate that the death would have occurred sometime, most likely that night or the early morning hours of the day that she was found.
The medical examiner indicated that there was no gunshot wounds, that the gun had not been used in the commission of the crime.
The pathologist ruled the cause of death to be asphyxiation along with blunt force trauma.
It was found that Sharon had been beaten pretty severely. She had also been strangled. She also suffered some broken ribs and had some defensive wounds on her hands from fighting off her attacker.
The autopsy contains one more disturbing detail.
She had a small vaginal tear as well, which indicated that she'd been sexually assaulted. I was definitely shocked that there was a sexual assault involved.
Totally unexpected. It added a new twist to the crime, which further led to more questions. It really makes you feel for the victim. She had to have been terrified for those few minutes that she struggled at the end of her life.
During the autopsy, her underwear were taken for possible examination for DNA. This being pretty early in the DNA process in the early 2000s, we waited.
2 days later, on July 10th, the trucker is back in town and police bring him in for questioning.
He's not overly cooperative. He was reluctant to give any details about where he was, what he was doing.
Detectives press the trucker on his relationship with Sharon.
The truck driver wouldn't have called Sharon a friend. He felt irritated by the way she would overreact, I believe is how he termed it.
He did not have a good relationship with her.
But the truck driver vows he's no killer.
He told us he was out of town at the time of the homicide. He was in Wyoming or Colorado. He was hundreds of miles away and had receipts to prove it. Officers were sent off to corroborate the receipt. He was asked for a DNA sample and a polygraph, and he refused.
Was the trucker hiding something?
It's just one of the things that you can add to a list of items that if there's too many on that list, it's a problem.
With nothing concrete linking the trucker to the homicide, detectives have to let him go.
Law enforcement officers were in the process of interviewing and chasing down alibis.
We'd been following up with people, but there was not a lot of new information coming in and not a lot of credible information.
With Sharon's murder still unsolved, the community remains on high alert.
Before this happened, it was probably one of the safest places you'd want to be. Everyone's on their toes. You know, you drive up, you lock your car, you lock your house, you watch everything. Here's a lady that just retired, 60-some years old. Who could do this? It just was a shock to the whole county.
As a community, you want resolution, or you at least want to know why it happened and how can we get some justice out of this.
Although the entire town is mourning the loss of Sharon, Rick Hartman seems to be taking an unnaturally keen interest in the investigation.
Rick would ask us about what we were doing about other leads, and then he would insert his thoughts.
His behavior was a little more pushy, trying to get as much information as Rick could.
Is this just a concerned friend who wants to see how the investigation's going, or is there something more to than that?
Despite his odd behavior, Rick still has a solid alibi, and the investigation stalls.
We decided that we all needed to get back together and just have like a brainstorm session and say, what do we do? One of the things that we talked about is at the time of the homicide, early 2000s, meth had been a problem.
People would steal anhydrous ammonia from tanks and then use that to create their own methamphetamine.
Some of these people were heavy addicts, very dangerous, and involved in a lot of crimes.
One of the things that was being discussed with the anhydrous tanks was they were not too far from Sharon's home. So could she have seen something? Could she have spotted something, said something to make someone believe that she knew who they were and what they were doing?
Did Sharon confront them? Did they attack her to keep her quiet?
We might be looking for somebody who's manufacturing and selling methamphetamine who may have been in Colon on that particular night.
Five weeks after Sharon Erickson is savagely beaten to death, detectives investigate whether she had been killed by a criminal gang manufacturing illegal drugs near her home.
It's an easy target, no cameras in that area. We were aware that Sharon kept an eye on Main Street. She a lot of times had information about suspicious people, something going on after hours there.
Sharon was one that if she saw something that she didn't think was right, she wasn't afraid to stand up and say something.
Maybe she saw something that she shouldn't have. She interrupted a burglary or a theft. As we talked to people around town, they also indicated that that might have been one of the reasons why Sharon may have been murdered.
Investigators had talked to local suspects who were involved in the manufacturing of methamphetamine. People that we had arrested previous to this incident, and then people from the metro areas. Most of them have pretty extensive criminal records, and they're heavily addicted. So the level of cooperation with somebody who's addicted to methamphetamine is not going to be very good.
It creates a difficult picture to paint. We were not able to generate the type of evidence or leads that we really would hope for.
We as a department were frustrated with things not happening real fast and the way that you always want.
The canvas fails to yield the information police were looking for, as does the investigation into the trucker.
As the investigation unfolded, the truck driver was eliminated. He was miles and miles away from the incident. We contacted the establishment where he got fuel, and it wasn't a phony receipt.
With this, the driver is fully off the suspect list.
After doing the first set of interviews and looking at potential suspects, the investigators really weren't able to focus on anybody that would be so mad or somebody that would want to sexually assault Sharon or to kill her. So it kind of left a lot of question marks. Where do you go? What do you look for? There's just a lot of unknowns.
We just don't know what's going on. Do we feel safe or do we need to worry?
Everybody had their ideas who did this, and I think it just kept going and going and going. People didn't have a clue, but they wanted to talk about it.
There was a lot of discussion amongst the community members as to what was going on. A lot of rumors floating around.
One of these rumors that starts circulating has to do with one of Sharon's good friends and a familiar name to detectives.
Because of Rick's close contact with Sharon, small town rumors began to surface that there may have been more than just a friendship there.
Many of the community members had mentioned rumors that Rick Hartman and Sharon had been having an affair.
We start to wonder, was there more to their friendship, maybe in a romantic way?
There was talk. This was something that was being discussed, so it's not that hard of a thought process or big of a leap to say, could he be involved?
Police talk to Rick again, this time at the sheriff's office.
He was cooperative. He somehow, I think, liked the attention.
But that changes when detectives ask Rick some very pointed questions.
Law enforcement actually asked him if there was a romantic relationship between the two of them.
He was immediately offended, and he denied that.
Mr. Hartman appeared to be very distraught. He said he was just friends with her, that there was no romantic relationship.
Could the sexual assault that appeared in Sharon's autopsy actually have been a consensual encounter with Rick?
That question certainly seems accusatory. Those things are not comfortable, but that comes with the job. You got to do your job. Rick was questioned in detail and really scrutinized on where he was, what his involvement was. There were a number of times he said, we got to look somewhere else because we were wasting our time on him.
He became agitated and wanted to go home.
Rick stands by the alibi he gave police back when they first questioned him 7 weeks ago at the crime scene.
Rick was home with his wife at the time that we believe Sharon was killed.
The investigators went and corroborated his story with his wife again.
We really had no reason to believe that Rick's wife would not disclose if he were gone at that time. Even though there were a lot of things that kind of pointed to him, he had a pretty good alibi.
With no hard evidence against Rick, detectives have to let him go, but not before getting one thing.
We collected DNA from Mr. Hartman.
We talked a little about it, and he says, but Don, I didn't do it. But again, you always have that doubt, what happened?
There was just speculation and suspicion.
2 months after Sharon's murder, detectives finally receive results from the forensics lab.
They had tried to do analysis on some of the items which were collected at autopsy to come up with a DNA profile.
Will this be the break detectives have been hoping for?
We were really needing something such as that to come through for us.
Months after the murder of Sharon Erickson, police hope the DNA results they've been waiting for will confirm who they suspect is her killer.
There was quite a bit of speculation that it could be the postmaster in town.
We were contacted by our state patrol lab. They believed that there was something there, but that they could not separate out a complete profile for comparison. It was kind of frustrating to know that there may be something there, but that maybe it was a dead end that we couldn't get past.
Without a DNA match, we as investigators knew that if that was the case, it would be very hard to solve this crime.
But detectives aren't giving up.
The Nebraska Medical Center could test smaller quantities than the State Patrol lab could do. So we made the determination that we would take our evidence and send it in to the other lab and have more DNA testing done.
Results will take months to come back, and with a killer still on the loose, nerves in small-town Colon, Nebraska begin to fray.
When the investigation went on and on and on, I thought, come on, we've got to find something. We had a murder back in 69 or 68 that was never solved in Wahoo. And of course, right away, you think, gosh, we got to find out who did this.
Could it be someone we do know? There can be a mistrust. All of a sudden you realize, maybe I don't know all my neighbors.
Then, police receive an unexpected tip that points back to the man they can't seem to rule out.
The estate of Sharon Erickson had a garage sale, and Rick Hartman was at the garage sale.
Mr. Hartman went in and purchased her mattress, and that was suspicious to us. If there was some sort of maybe DNA evidence or something that would be on the mattress that would be of interest to law enforcement, by somebody purchasing that and maybe getting rid of it, then it would be something that we would no longer be able to go back and utilize at a later time.
Did he want the mattress because they did have potential sexual activity on the mattress? Maybe he was out there trying to hide additional evidence. Every time investigators seemed to close a loophole with Mr. Hartman, something else happened. He kept drawing attention to him. It was just another thing that brought him back on radar.
Law enforcement asked him about his attendance there and what he bought. He actually denied that he bought her mattress. So then that caused law enforcement some concern on why would you buy it? Okay, why, if you did buy it, why would you lie about it?
Mr. Hartman agreed to undergo a polygraph, so he cooperated in that aspect, but he seemed nervous, on edge, jittery. The results from that polygraph were inconclusive. It left a lot of questions unanswered. It just added a little fuel to the fire.
Every chance that we could get that he could clear his name seemed to be something that elevated him to the next level.
The people in town were thinking it had to be him and were scared to go to the post office.
In a small community where pretty much everybody knows everybody, it's easy to point fingers, it's easy to cast doubts.
I golfed with Rick Hartman that week in our golf league, and he was just nervous. He was just edgy and just scared.
A number of us may have felt like Mr. Hartman had acted inappropriately or suspiciously. We just didn't have enough to really push it over the top.
There was nothing that we could charge him with. We had no evidence that he committed the crime, other than he kept interjecting himself in the investigation.
Detectives hope that definitive proof will come from the Medical Center Forensic Lab.
The last piece that we didn't have back yet was the DNA evidence.
We got a phone call and they were able to isolate a DNA profile.
They actually located a sperm cell on her clothing, which was a positive breakthrough for us. The only person that it could have been from would have been the person that had sexually assaulted her and presumably killed her.
We felt that there was more hope in solving this than we had had for quite a while, because at least DNA is something that we can link to a specific person.
Armed with this DNA profile, police immediately zero in on their top suspect.
We did send in Rick Hartman's DNA. Came back not a match.
Rick's name is finally cleared from the suspect list, once and for all.
Scientific evidence is what it is. It confirmed everything that he was telling us. There was no romantic relationship.
We were focused on an individual that had absolutely nothing to do with the homicide. I apologize for any stress we caused him or his family.
But if it wasn't Rick, then who killed Sharon?
One of the big concerns that we had is that if this was a stranger that was maybe passing through town, or someone completely not associated with the community or with Sharon, that it potentially could go unsolved without any additional evidence coming forward.
Investigators are back to square one, but they come up with a new game plan.
We try to determine who else should we go out and collect samples from, who else were potential suspects, who could have done this, and who would provide those samples so we can send them in and see if there's a match.
It was just a matter of being able to find that one person out there in the world that belonged to. We're trying to get that needle in a haystack.
10 months after Sharon's murder, in April 2004, police get the results of their DNA dragnet.
The lab got a confirmation that they had a match.
We now know who killed Sharon. It was the breakthrough that we needed.
It sent shockwaves through the entire area.
Almost a year after the murder of Sharon Erickson, police have matched DNA from the crime scene to her killer.
The DNA came back and it matched Jim Mars.
James lived nearby to Sharon. He was one of the people that police talked to early on.
Jim had known Sharon nearly all his life.
He had helped her out when he was younger, doing some yard work or snow removal.
I was kind of speechless at first because he had no problem providing his DNA to law enforcement.
I was shocked to find out that James Mars was the perpetrator. We had never seen that type of violence out of him.
Once we had a DNA match with Jim, we needed to figure out where the holes in his alibi are.
When we originally interviewed Jim Mars, he said he'd been out in a bar in Wahoo and later went home. The bartender believed the timeline that Jim had given us was fairly accurate.
Jim's mother stands by her story, too.
I think those alibis were solid, but they didn't cover him for the whole evening. What I think happened is he was home and left. He lived right across the back alley from Sharon's house. And even if he would have been home, that doesn't mean he didn't leave his house. The determination was that we did have enough evidence to proceed with the arrest and prosecution of Jim.
We went to his residence very early in the morning, and he answered the door, and we placed him under arrest. He was shocked that he was being arrested, that he was considered the suspect. We brought him in to interview him.
Police try to establish a motive.
That was one of the unique things in this case, to find out and even just try to resolve that big why. Why would that even happen?
He was reluctant to give any details. There were a number of times he said, "I don't remember." He sobbed at times.
He said he didn't have anything to do with it, denied that he had any involvement. When asked about the sexual assault, he stated that Sharon was an old lady and he wouldn't do that. And from that point on, he stated he wanted an attorney, and we stopped our questioning.
We had filed charges for first-degree homicide, sexual assault.
News of his arrest hits the community hard.
This was very unexpected. I thought, my gosh, something's wrong here. I mean, you just can't believe it. I was hoping that they'd catch someone that I did not know the family.
The reaction in town was split. There was definitely a thought that, it couldn't have been him that did it. And then there were supporters that, we thought maybe it was him.
While investigators are confident that DNA evidence will be enough to get a conviction, they get even more ammunition against Jim.
We had at least 5 inmates come forward with information that Mr. Mars had confessed to them. He struck her, strangled her, killed her. These inmates were going to testify against him, that he had confessed to them.
With this information, investigators piece together what happened the night of the murder.
Jim was at the bar, like he said. He had a few too many drinks at some point. Went home. He wasn't able to sleep.
From what he told the other inmates, he was looking for some money. He thought Sharon may be an easy target. He was just going to burglarize her house.
He climbed over Sharon's fence in the backyard, cut her phone line so she wouldn't be able to call anybody, pried her back door open, and ended up kicking the door in order to go see if he could find her purse or find some money that was laying around.
Once that back door was kicked in, Sharon woke up.
He was confronted by Sharon, who was holding a gun and threatened to shoot him at that point if he didn't leave.
Sharon went to call 911 and her phone line was dead. She kept her cell phone in her car for emergencies.
Sharon ran across the street to get into her car. Jim chased her down, caught her, and ended up attacking her.
He punched her and then eventually choked her to death.
There was a sexual assault. He refused to talk to the inmates about that.
Had he not sexually assaulted her and we didn't have any DNA, we would never have it solved when you have a sperm cell that was
people know everybody. In some of these small towns, you can leave your doors unlocked. Leave your windows open.
But Hattiesburg isn't like most of rural Mississippi. And a little before noon that Sunday, 27-year-old Tracy Bullock makes a panicked call to Lamar County 911.
Hello? 911, what's your emergency?
Yes, my
Tracy stated that his girlfriend was shot.
Where is she shot?
She got shot in the head. He said that they need to hurry up because she needed attention.
I'll send first responders to you now.
When a call comes into 911, there's a shooting or a robbery or something that's happening right then and there, it becomes a code 1, a priority. So they try to get officers there as fast as they can.
But will they get there in time to save 19-year-old Davisha Harris?
Hurry, please, hurry, she's bleeding. Davisha!
Before moving to Hattiesburg, Davisha Harris spent most of her life in tiny Gloucester, Mississippi. Population, 897.
The town has got like 8, 9 stop signs and no red lights.
We have just one grocery store. We have maybe 3 gas stations, and that's it.
The third of 4 children, Davisha was the only daughter.
All of them spoiled, but Davisha was the spoilest, I do believe. She would probably get maybe more gifts than the other kids. Her mother, Tasha, my wife, always say it's daddy's girl. Yeah, that's daddy's girl, but when it comes down to my wife, anywhere my wife went, she was right along with her. Or she was gonna fall out crying because she couldn't go.
Davisha and I, we were very close. Pretty much we could talk about anything. She could come to me with anything.
She was always a happy-go-lucky young lady. Just beautiful inside and out.
And nearly everyone in their tiny town agreed.
She was very popular among her peers. Even adults knew Davisha in the community. She knew the grandmother, she knew the mother, she knew the cousins, even the out-of-town relatives, people that we didn't even know existed. Davisha knew them.
Davisha was the type of person, you go down the road, she'd allow to let the window down and open the car door, hey, Lucy! That's the type of person she was, all over town.
She was a person that saw the beauty in everyone.
But what Davisha enjoyed most was making others laugh.
She was the jokester of the family, life of the party. She actually won class clown in her senior year.
You can't even get mad at her because as soon as you look at her, I bust out laughing. That was our relationship.
But despite her vibrant personality, Davisha was anything but worldly.
Davisha's parents sheltered her in a lot of ways.
Davisha rarely went anywhere. If she did, it was usually with me. She got a little older, we gave her a little room, but it wasn't very much.
She was not allowed to date while in high school.
Which may explain why after graduation, Davisha couldn't wait to go out on her own.
She was supposed to leave in August to go to community college here in Hattiesburg, but she came to me and her dad actually maybe 2 days after she graduated and said she wanted to go to summer school. I think she graduated May the 20th, and she left on May the 31st from home to Hattiesburg.
And once she was in the big city of Hattiesburg, there was no looking back.
Gloucester is like 900 people compared to 50,000 people in a town like Hattiesburg. For people like Davisha, who grow up in small towns like that, the lure of the bright city lights are appealing.
She was a small town girl looking to start her life as an independent adult just to see what the big city has to offer.
Davisha quickly came into her own.
She enjoyed going to college and working at a call center. She did well in both. She was a productive citizen. She was.
She also had big plans for her future.
Her mom is a nurse, so she always talked about being a nurse, following in her mom's footsteps.
She was planning on transferring into the nursing program.
She was definitely going places.
And she wasn't going alone. By the time she started her second year in college, she'd met Tracy Bullock.
It was her first serious romantic relationship.
She actually met him through a friend she met while attending college.
He was older and wasn't a student.
So what you going to school for?
I want to be a nurse like my mom.
He was very charismatic, charming.
And he was more than happy to show Davisha around town.
That was a sense of relief, like I'm not going through this alone. I find this guy that I've connected with and can kind of navigate life with, and that made her happy.
But no amount of guidance could steer Davisha clear of danger.
Hello? In a frantic call to 911, Tracy said Davisha's been shot.
Hurry, please, hurry, she's bleeding.
First responders race to the scene. But there's little they can do for Davisha.
Police, help her! From your hand!
They found the victim with a apparent gunshot wound to the head.
When they checked her vitals, Davisha was already dead.
She's gone.
Just a tragedy, tragedy.
And according to Tracy, it was completely random.
He said a vehicle was driving through and actually shot up the apartment.
They was just shooting up the place.
He was saying that it could have potentially been gang violence.
Start college and get a job, and she did both when she moved here to Hattiesburg.
She also entered her first serious relationship with 27-year-old Tracy Bullock.
That was a lot of new transitions for a young person, and so to have someone that was older, much more experienced, made her happy.
But on October 15th, 2017, her young life, so full of promise, would end in tragedy.
Lamar County Sheriff Office received a call from 911.
Yes, my girlfriend just...
Tracy called to say that Davisha had just been shot.
Hurry, please, hurry, she's bleeding.
By the time police arrived, she was already dead.
She's gone.
News of Davisha's murder quickly reaches her family.
My son called and said that her neighbor had messaged him through Facebook and told him that Davisha had been shot. And by the time I got up, he was calling right back and saying she was gone. She was dead. And at that point, I just fell out onto the ground.
While Davisha's family rushes to the apartment for answers, homicide detectives arrive at the scene and start to piece together what happened.
They had the victim, who of course suffered from an apparent gunshot wound, so they know the firearm was involved, but there was none at the scene. That makes it a little more difficult because you want to have that murder weapon.
They do locate Davisha's cell phone, however.
The phone was protected by a passcode.
They bagged and sent it to the crime lab so they could hopefully gain access to whatever was in the phone.
Sometimes that takes a little while to break into it.
Then, once their brief survey of the scene is complete, detectives turn to Davisha's boyfriend, Tracy, who was waiting outside the apartment.
He had been waiting in the back of the squad car ever since the first officers arrived on the scene.
As a detective, the first thing you want to do is talk to witnesses.
They told me she was dead.
I'm sorry, sir.
Do you want to tell us what happened?
Yes, I saw the whole thing.
He said he heard tires squeal, and when he looked out the window, he saw a car coming down the street.
The passenger window rolled down, but I didn't see a gun.
However, according to Tracy, he did hear the shots.
Somebody was doing a drive-by shooting.
Could you see who was in the vehicle?
No. I didn't see anybody.
Do you know the license plate number?
No. Soon as they started shooting, I hit the floor.
For detectives, it sounds like an all too familiar scenario.
Despite being a city of less than 50,000, Hattiesburg does have a gang problem.
It's kind of the central location between Mobile, Jackson, and New Orleans.
A lot of the drug trafficking between those larger cities passes through Hattiesburg.
But if this was a drive-by, who was the intended target?
Davisha was not one to be known for running around with gangs or any kind of criminal behavior.
She was a good girl, going to college.
Was she simply in the wrong place at the wrong time? Or was she with the wrong person?
While detectives were talking to Tracy, officers ran a search on his name in police records.
In doing interviews with witnesses, it's common to want to check their background just to see who you're talking to.
When the officer enters his name into the computer, something pops.
He was wanted on a warrant in Macomb from where he originally from.
They were looking for him anyway.
Hey, detectives. You're aware you got a warrant out for your arrest? Put your hands behind your back.
What you doing?
He was arrested on the scene for violation of probation.
Detectives figured it was a way to keep tabs on him until they fully understood his involvement in the shooting.
The squad car carrying Tracy into custody has barely pulled away when Davisha's parents arrive on the scene.
Where's my baby?
He was gone by the time we got there, and I tried to make my way into the apartment to see my daughter, but they wouldn't let me.
They stopped us. They didn't want us to go in the apartment.
You try to be compassionate and explain to them that you're going to do everything that you can, and hopefully you can get to some answers at the end of the day, but it's still tough.
Once I figured out how bad it was, I'm glad I didn't. I didn't want to see my daughter like that, the situation where it was.
I want to remember like she was, you know.
At the scene, detectives try to interview Davisha's parents, but they're too distraught for a formal statement.
Emotionally, it was tough because that's our only daughter.
No parents expect to outlive your children. No one expects to have to bury their child.
But when Davisha's oldest brother arrives at the apartment, he agrees to speak with police.
Where's Tracy?
The first thing he asked is, where's Tracy?
We have him in custody.
They had arrested Tracy at that time under other charges, though.
Should be trying for murder.
Why is that?
He was not too fond of Tracy.
In fact, Davisha's brother said he'd had a tense encounter with Tracy just a few weeks earlier.
I wish he'd have whooped his ass.
Gating her murder, that he wouldn't be surprised if her boyfriend, Tracy Bullock, had something to do with it.
At this point, police already had Tracy in custody, but that arrest had nothing to do with the murder investigation.
He was arrested for a warrant that he had out.
However, detectives suspect Tracy may have been the true target of Davisha's killer.
She died in what Tracy described as a drive-by shooting.
Why do you think he's involved?
The guy's bad news.
Although, according to Davisha's brother, he'd only met Tracy once.
It was just 2 weeks before the murder.
He had a cell phone charger that Davisha wanted to borrow.
He lives in Hattiesburg as well, and he was gonna take her charger.
He just went to her home just to see if she was there to drop it off.
That's when Davisha's brother noticed their mother's car in the parking lot.
She had borrowed my car because we had to change a flat out on her car.
She'd gotten a flat while she was back home in Gloucester over the weekend.
Being such a small town, there wasn't no repair shop there to take care of it, so we just switched cars to let her come back to Hattiesburg to come to school and work.
But when her brother noticed someone was smoking in the car, he was furious.
He's wondering what's going on when he saw this stranger sitting in his mother's car smoking marijuana.
He was sitting in the car smoking dope, chilling with the air on like he owned it.
My oldest son, he actually recorded, sitting in the car with the windows up and stuff. And he sent us a picture back to tell us what the guy was doing in the car, and he wasn't pleased with it.
Oh! What are you doing?
So Davisha's brother confronted Tracy.
Not that he knew who Tracy was at the time.
No one in the family knew about the relationship.
None of us had met him officially, so we didn't know his name, He opened the door and asked him to get out the car and asked him what was he doing, smoking marijuana and music up loud, blasting.
Who the hell are you? This is my mom's car. Well, you best to get the running to her.
When we got him out of it, the dude was still kind of disrespectful.
He got out of the car and proclaimed that it was his girlfriend's car. He can do whatever he wants to do.
That's how we found out who he was.
I don't care who you are. Don't be smoking in my mom's car. You gonna make me?
He and my oldest son did have some words.
Tracy, it's okay. It's okay.
In the midst of those words, Davisha came and got in between them.
I don't know. She didn't want to see his brother go to jail or was in love with this fool. I don't know.
Davisha's brother says he'd let it go.
I guess since he's my sister's boyfriend, he kind of had permission.
Before he left, he did have a word with his sister.
That brother was like, sister, are you sure this is what you want?
The behavior that my son has saw that wasn't acceptable to any of us, you know.
He was smoking weed and, doing the things that they didn't care to be around.
I'm not a baby anymore.
I know.
I can look after myself. Go inside.
Davisha felt like that he just didn't want her with anybody, but that wasn't the case, in that scenario. That wasn't the case. It was what he was doing.
So that's why you think he had something to do with it?
Yeah.
It was just a hunch.
Yeah, but I'm telling you, something ain't right.
Detectives don't entirely disagree, but their suspicion of Tracy is based on something more concrete than him smoking marijuana or being disrespectful to Davisha's brother.
Despite Tracy's claim that Davisha was killed in a drive-by, there was no evidence to support that.
There were no bullet holes, no shell casings.
Not a single one.
It didn't make any sense.
He didn't even try to come up with a plausible lie.
Death wasn't due to a drive-by shooting, as her boyfriend Tracy Bullock claimed.
There were no bullet holes in the couple's apartment building.
Detectives couldn't find any shell casings in the street either.
When they canvassed the neighbors, none of them said anything about a car driving through and shooting things up.
The evidence don't support there was any kind of drive-by.
Which means that Tracy has some explaining to do.
From the crime scene, detectives head back to the county jail, where Tracy is waiting in a holding cell.
Detectives had already taken him into custody for an outstanding warrant.
When confronted with the inconsistencies between his drive-by story and the conditions at the crime scene, Tracy admits that he'd lied.
Okay, man, it wasn't a drive-by shooting. It wasn't, okay?
Well, what'd you say it was?
Because I know how y'all work.
He didn't tell the truth because he had this distrust for the police.
Mississippi has its fair share of challenges as it relates to racial issues around policing.
Okay, so who shot her then?
I don't know.
Tracy says that instead of a drive-by, it had all started with a knock at their door.
You expecting somebody?
Nope.
He said that when he opened the door, there was a man on their doorstep with a gun.
Tracy said he ducked and slammed the door.
And the shooter didn't try to come in?
No. He must have ran off.
The way Tracy told the story, it sounded like someone tried to put a hit out on him.
But according to Tracy, the would-be hitman missed their target.
Davisha! Oh my God.
But you don't know who the shooter was?
Dude had a hoodie on.
Detectives aren't sure if he's lying about the shooter's identity.
Given his criminal record, there may be a connection that Tracy doesn't want the detectives digging into.
Or is it simply his drive-by shooting story all over again?
The passenger window rolled down, but I didn't see a gun.
The police catch him in the lie. His story changes. Okay, somebody came to the door, knocked on the door, and he was shooting at me, but there was nothing to substantiate that.
The next day, when detectives finally sit down with Davisha's parents, they have no doubt that Tracy is lying about the mysterious hitman.
They saw the red flags. They had the concerns in the weeks, the months leading up to her death. And so for them, it was like, no, we know who is responsible.
So, what sort of red flags?
Well, first of all, her finances, for one thing.
When she get paid on Fridays, she'll provide everything she needed up to the time for her to get paid again. But we noticed where she would come home on Fridays, she wouldn't have money to get back to Hattiesburg on Sunday.
Me taking food out, I'll freeze the refrigerator, take it back. Like, I mean, you working, why you need all this here?
She didn't respond at all, She didn't have anything much to say.
But the answer became clear a couple of weeks before the homicide.
That's when Davisha's brother found out she had a boyfriend.
We still didn't know his name at that point, but he was sitting in my car, smoking marijuana with the windows up, with the music on loud.
It didn't give her parents a good impression of Tracy.
They got to figure that, he was using her.
She started saying, I want you to meet him, and that's when I started questioning her about who is he, where does he work? And when she gave me those answers, I told her I wouldn't be interested in it because he was much older than she was, and he didn't have a job, so I'm not interested.
Just meet him. I know you'll like him. I don't think so.
Mom! He didn't fit the standards of what we had raised her for, and what we had raised her around and what her dad showed her what a man was supposed to be. That's what I told her up front.
I told her, Davisha, I don't like him, I don't like what he's doing.
There wasn't the kind of boyfriend that she would want to get involved with. There was going to be one or two things, trouble where she was going to end up in jail with him, by being caught by the police or being hurt really bad.
Mom, I knew you would say that.
I think she knew I wasn't going to be pleased with it.
It may have also been what attracted Davisha to a bad boy like Tracy in the first place.
She was naive in a sense because we had sheltered her so much. She hadn't been introduced to any of those things.
Young ladies that have been somewhat sheltered for so long, when they get a taste of freedom, that appeal of being with someone that I know my parents would not necessarily approve of can be very captivating. And so there can be this sort of adrenaline rush, or there can be this sort of thrill, whether it's the healthiest decision or not.
But while her parents didn't approve of Tracy, they tell detectives they didn't push Davisha to end the relationship.
I knew if I'd have stayed and harped on the situation, it was just gonna push her closer to him. So I was trying to give her the time to see what was going on, wake up to what was going on.
Despite that, as her father predicted, Davisha had continued to see Tracy.
I think it strengthened their relationship at the time, and it actually became a us against them. I think that was the turning point in why he felt so comfortable with some of the behaviors that he demonstrated thereafter, because he had psychological control and emotional control over her at that point.
And now that Davisha is dead, her parents are convinced that they'd been right about Tracy.
Those parents did, I'm sure, what they thought was best at the time. Again, there were red flags.
I was considering death by somebody else hurting her, being caught up in crossfire with him some kind of way, It never came to me as him actually killing her.
But now you think he did.
Yes.
But why would he do that?
Because she finally came to her senses. She wanted to leave him.
I believe she told him that his honey hole is dried up. It's time for him to go.
They think Bullock was not willing to accept rejection, and he took things to the extreme.
I think that's exactly what happened. I go to the grave with that.
It's a compelling theory. Only there's one problem.
There was no evidence that Tracy had been violent or threatening toward Davisha.
But that all changes when the crime lab finally cracks the passcode on Davisha's phone.
She had everything in her phone with the ARG and everything else that was going on.
Hey, come here.
It's an indication that she knew that this was an issue. She knew that, this is an unsafe situation.
Look at this.
Because one video taken less than 48 hours before the murder showed Tracy with a gun.
It was Friday night, pointing it toward her,
You ain't gonna shoot?
Bullock on Davisha's phone.
They found a video with Mr. Bullock pointing a gun at the victim.
Davisha had recorded the video less than 48 hours before her murder.
This absolutely demonstrates someone who was incredibly reckless, careless, impulsive, and honestly had no regard for Davisha's life. Even if the intent in that moment was not to pull the trigger, to put the gun in her face, that was an act to intimidate, an act to really incite fear.
But does that mean he'd eventually follow through on his threat?
Davisha's parents believe Tracy killed her because she told him she was going to leave him.
I believe she actually woke up and seen the light. She stepped to him and told him it was over, gone, where you gonna go or whatever.
When someone decides to leave an abusive relationship, that's when things are most dangerous.
For many abusers, experiencing that sense of lack of control can feel incredibly threatening for them. And that's when we see like the lashing out. That's when we see the very impulsive behaviors, things becoming physical, things becoming violent and aggressive.
Did that explain why Davisha recorded the incident?
She could have been thinking about needing evidence or documentation for a potential restraining order. Like if she had made up in her mind that this is it, I have to end this relationship. She could have been thinking very future focused. I'm going to have to put some things in place legally to protect myself. That's the first thing that comes to mind when I think about the fact that she had video.
Was it too little too late? For the moment, detectives are still far from proving it.
The case against Tracy was entirely circumstantial.
But it does get stronger when detectives receive the results of Davisha's autopsy and confirm the cause of death.
According to the medical examiner, it was a close contact wound to the head.
There's some stippling around the wound.
Stippling is where unburnt powder strikes the skin around the gunshot wound.
That tells them that it was up close and personal.
Which isn't how Tracy described the shooting in his second statement.
He said Davisha was some distance behind him when he ducked out of the would-be assassin's way.
After the autopsy was done, all of those things just proved to be untrue.
Most important for investigators, the autopsy also recovers the bullet that killed Davisha.
If they can find a weapon, they can use that ballistic evidence to match it back to that gun.
The caliber of the bullet appeared to be from the same gun that Tracy had in the video, but without ballistics testing, detectives couldn't prove it was the same gun.
They can solve this case possibly with the circumstantial evidence that they have, but there's nothing like cold hard evidence, that smoking gun. So that's what they need to find.
Until they do, all Davisha's family can do is wait and gather to say goodbye.
The homegoing celebration, it was more people there that I'd never seen before in my life. I mean, the church was full.
I think our church at that time held like 400 or 500. It was full. We had chairs down the aisle.
There was not a seat vacant for anybody. Like, it was a full house. There were people in the aisles. There were people standing up in the back of the church.
And that just showed me that she was well loved and well respected. You know, only 19 years old to have all these type of people showing up.
The outpouring of love for Davisha is little solace, knowing that the man they believe is her killer is yet to be charged with murder.
The amount of frustration and just pain and anger that they felt in that moment, I'm sure, was unbearable. It's like, no, this is a person who did this, a person who needs to be held accountable, like he's right here.
The guy took her life. The videos are self-explanatory.
You could actually see where he had the gun that Friday night.
But where was the gun now? Detectives are at a loss for where to begin their search.
At this point in the investigation, the detectives, they don't have that smoking gun. That's a key piece of evidence that's missing.
Fortunately, detectives won't have to search hard to find it.
All this time, Tracy was still in jail for the probation violation.
And that could prove his undoing after a cellmate of Tracy's at the Lamar County Jail reaches out to the detectives.
It's not uncommon for that to happen, and sometimes we just have good luck.
The informant said that while they shared a cell, Tracy had talked about Davisha's murder.
He's telling me about how he killed this girl.
He gives them a lot of information about the case. And some of the information is information only the person that did the murder would know.
Including what Tracy had done with the murder weapon.
He told me where he hid it.
To him all about how he'd killed his girlfriend, Davisha Harris.
He's in jail, telling his cellmate what he did and what he did with the murder weapon.
And this other inmate decided to talk to investigators and give them information. And the reason why he would want to do that is to possibly get some time off his own sentence.
It's a huge break in the case, if it's the truth.
Following up on the tip, detectives searched where the informant said Tracy had disposed of the gun.
And he gave the exact location where the gun would be.
It appeared to be a match for the gun Tracy had in Davisha's cell phone video.
But is it really the murder weapon?
When the crime lab compared the gun with the bullet recovered during Davisha's autopsy, it was a match.
It's news Davisha's family has been waiting to hear.
The investigators actually called us and told us they had found the weapon. They knew that he killed Davisha, so it was going to actually be murder.
As a detective, the best thing about this job is being able to come to them and give them that closure.
That sense of closure proved short-lived, however.
The prosecutor felt like the case wasn't strong enough for a murder conviction.
Rather than pursue murder charges, they offered Tracy the opportunity to plead to manslaughter.
Manslaughter is something that happened in the heat of the moment. It could be an argument, an altercation, which caused the suspect to kill the victim.
In other words, if you were in the heat of passion, again, just based on human being, human nature, you're not in your right mind.
Tracy takes the deal, admitting that he shot Davisha in the middle of an argument.
I'm done. You need to leave.
For what?
I'm done. I'm done with this and I'm done with you.
I ain't going nowhere.
Oh, okay. Big man with a gun.
Oh, you don't think I'll do it?
I know you won't.
He was someone that was spiraling. He was rapidly unraveling.
For Davisha's family, Tracy's plea deal is a slap in the face.
A lot of emotions was tied up. Anger, disappointment, just pain, you know. It was just unrealistic pain. It was like just almost living that heartache over again, that initial heartache.
When your loved one has been in a situation where they've had that person brandish a gun, threaten them when there's video footage to show it, it's kind of difficult to accept that he was just angry or jealous in the moment.
You took her life. And to me, in my opinion, it was premeditated.
At Tracy's sentencing hearing, Davisha's family makes it clear they consider the plea deal a travesty of justice.
They would read the impact statement to him of how we actually felt about it, about this whole situation. And he was just a little punk ass, too scared to even turn his head and look and listen. I told him, won't you turn your head, look at me while I'm talking to you, mother. But he wouldn't do it. He wouldn't do it.
He was sitting there shaking his dreads and kind of laughing at us, you know, smiling at us, you know, like, I beat this case, you know, like, I've got over on y'all. Y'all not getting what y'all thought y'all was gonna get. You know what I'm saying? Because we will always think justice will be revealed.
Will a father's impassioned statement and Tracy's apparent contempt for the process have an impact on the judge?
The judge himself, he asked the DA 3 times, is this all you charging this man with all the evidence I see here? He asked the DA 3 times. The DA said yes.
And in the end, the judge honors the terms of the plea and sentences Tracy to 15 years.
He was let off lightly, and it was not fair. I was very angry when I heard about it.
I have nothing for the legal system now. You know, it's just, they just let us down. It's like we didn't matter to them, that she didn't matter, and she does matter.
We're talking about a 19-year-old young lady who had her entire life ahead of her, who was just starting to really establish herself, really starting to understand what it even means to be independent and to be an adult, and to have her life senselessly taken away from her. I don't think she nor her family received justice.
He still gets to get out, create a family, and just live his life, and she wasn't able to do that.
The Harris family is going to be affected forever. Forever and ever.
I'm coping. Day by day, I'm coping. But you never forget it.
Although Davisha's parents do hope that her story will allow others to avoid a similar fate.
Someone starts to physically abuse you, verbally abuse you emotionally, you need to get out the relationship as fast as you can. Tell somebody.
When you see these red flags, when you see these warning signs, take them to heart.
Let somebody know, if it's not your parents or your siblings, somebody you respect that's older. Let them know so this situation won't happen again.
But they also see Davisha's story as a cautionary tale for parents.
Teach your child to always be mindful of the company they keep or the individual they want to date.
Her being naive played a part, not realizing what she was stepping into, the danger what she was stepping into.
Because what you lose can be more than any family can bear.
She's a sweet person. You know, it's truly missed. Truly missed by all.
She wasn't here for a long time, but she definitely left her mark.
And later, in Dayton, Ohio, after a series of run-ins with the law, Tonisha Harris turns over a new leaf to provide for her family.
She was working so hard as a single parent, she really didn't have time for love.
That is, until a new man enters her life, and he asks her to help clean up his dirty deeds.
She fell to the ground and was dead almost immediately.
She had never gone this far, but he was willing to take her over the edge.
A child of the state in Pensacola, Florida, Kaisha Pugh has little contact with her parents.
She really didn't have a lot of guidance because her mother was not really there, so she really had a lot of disadvantages growing up.
They placed her into foster care, so she was kind of like lost, and she didn't know really what really happened until she felt like she did something wrong.
It's really easy for kids' abandonment issues to put them at risk for situations that are abusive.
In fact, the young girl's problems follow her all the way through her teen years.
She was required to attend an alternative school for those individuals with learning challenges.
Kaisha makes the most of it under the circumstances and tries to have as normal a high school life as possible.
She went to the prom, and she went to a couple dances. She graduated.
After she turns 18, the graduate departs foster care, and she reconnects with her mother.
She was very happy. She thought that this would be an opportunity where she could foster the relationship with her mother that she wanted, and even took it to the point where they moved in together.
I believe her mother had took some classes and stuff with parenting and had improved, and she started making better decisions for her when she returned home.
But the newfound stability doesn't keep her from getting into hot water.
Kaisha got involved in shoplifting, for which she was subsequently arrested.
Lucky for the first-time offender, the judge shows leniency. After being charged with petty theft, her case is dismissed when she successfully completes an anti-shoplifting course.
She was required to attend on-the-job training, which gave her the opportunity to develop some work skills to acclimate her to the workforce.
You're able to work part-time. She was at a thrift store, and she gained responsibility.
Her co-workers soon learn that Kaisha is very trusting and quick to follow anyone that shows her the slightest kindness, especially men.
I don't believe she had a lot of luck with men because she dated late, and I think that anyone that showed her attention, she fell for.
Kids who grow up without any strong emotional bonds often feel that they don't belong, and so they'll latch on to any person or any situation, no matter how appropriate or inappropriate, in order to be able to develop feelings of love and acceptance.
Over the next few years, Kaisha shifts from one relationship to the next and ends up having 3 children from different men.
And she didn't really have a lot of support.
And then she started losing more and more confidence, and then she just started drifting.
It's really important for anyone, but in this particular case, mothers, to feel focused, because if they go down the wrong path or they feel down, they start to develop very negative and destructive habits.
Try as she might, the cycle repeats itself when she falls on hard times and her children are taken away from her, just like when she went into the system years ago.
She would say, well, I don't want to be like my mama. She said, I want to have my kids. I want to raise my kids. I want to be with my kids.
It's a tough blow to Kaisha, so she starts to clean up her act by attending church, so it looks good for the courts.
And she wanted to get a job.
When she was on the road to try to get her life back together, she fought diligently to try to get her children back.
But all of her plans get put on hold when she meets 26-year-old Anthony Presley.
Anthony and Kaisha met at the bus station, and she was happy because she wasn't in a relationship.
Oh, she fell for him very hard. His looks and charm and his streetwise ways were something that she did not know how to handle. And based on the fact that she was looking for that type of attention and affection, especially from a man.
Some late bloomers, when they get involved in relationships, may tend to either not recognize or be in denial about the warning signs, most likely because they just don't have the proper experience to be in a healthy relationship.
Turns out, Anthony's rap sheet goes back 10 years, and Kaisha doesn't seem to mind his less than stellar past. Soon, rumors of attempts to dominate and humiliate her make the rounds among her family and friends.
Even going so far as demanding her to strip naked in front of his friends as an exercise of his control.
Go on, strip.
And then he was like, you're nothing but a effing slut. She, you know, was upset and she cried, but he didn't care. And I'm like, it was just very disrespectful.
You know, he didn't have no emotional feelings for her. And so that's the reason why he felt that she would do what he tell her to do.
Some women tend to see their guys or boyfriends' controlling behaviors as being loving behaviors, but in fact it's the opposite of that, in that they're treated as objects instead of people and are often mistreated in that kind of a process.
Even though he did the thing that he did, she still trusted him and she still loved him. Couldn't tell her anything different.
Despite his questionable behavior, the two become an item, and Anthony introduces her to his cousin Gregory Williams and Gregory's new girlfriend, Melinda McCormick.
Gregory and Melinda had only been together a few months, and all 4 of them would enjoy each other's company and go over Melinda's house and hang out from time to time.
As Gregory and Melinda get to know each other better, he learns about a dark chapter in her life that is finally turning around.
Not too long before this, Linda suffered a car accident and she was expecting a large sum of money on her Social Security card.
Soon after, Anthony listens intently as his cousin spills the beans and a dark plot brews.
Well, they intended to beat Melinda and take her property and money.
Anthony wants Kaisha's help, and he's willing to tell her just about anything to get it.
I think they had the plan set, but then added Kaisha in as an assistant and just told her that they were getting the money that they owed from the lady.
But she has no idea what she's about to do will start a firestorm that will burn through countless lives.
This was a brutal and heinous crime, and a callous individual who has no concern for anyone else.
She did pretty much anything.
Plot, cooked up by bad boy boyfriend Anthony Presley and his cousin Gregory Williams. Their mark? Gregory's unsuspecting girlfriend, Melinda McCormick, who's coming into a financial settlement.
Gregory was behind wanting to get the money, but since he knew so much about Melinda's life and where she hid the money and her routine.
Gregory informed Anthony as far as the layout of the house, the amount of money that he expected her to be receiving, where she normally keeps her credit cards and things of that nature, as well as her Social Security checks.
Kaisha agrees to help.
He would always tell her to do things and she would do it. So if he needed assistance, what right person will be there that's gonna do what you tell them to do?
They probably didn't even tell her that plan. They probably didn't let her know a lot of things. They just leaded her the way to go with them.
Just like some people can be blinded by greed, others can be blinded by love and not think clearly or know what it is that they really want. And that's why they'll go to very extreme measures in order to keep that relationship.
On the eve of Easter Sunday, the gang chooses their weapons in preparation for the impending attack.
The trio went to Gregory's mother's house where they armed themselves with a variety of blunt objects. Kaisha had a lead pipe, Anthony had a crowbar, and Gregory had an hammer.
Not only is she showing her devotion, but she's demonstrating that she's willing to just gamble away her future and her freedom.
Around midnight, they place the items in a duffel bag and head over to Melinda's. An unsuspecting Melinda has no idea what lies in wait outside her door.
She opened the door and let these friends in as usual. However, once she turned her back, Gregory pounced on her and began choking her out on the floor.
Next, Kaisha proves to Anthony just how down she is.
Kaisha stepped over her friend and began beating her in the head, prompting Melinda to cry out.
Relentless in their assault, the three take turns beating her, each with their respective tools.
The torture that she went through and the weapons that they used was very devastating.
Kaisha shows no restraint as she beats Melinda.
So therefore, if you're there, everybody participates, or else you're considered a weak link. So if she didn't participate and show that she was fully committed to this incident, she might have been the next victim herself.
She never been through that experience, with somebody beating somebody. I think she was more scared and in a state of shock.
Melinda suffers over 40 blows to her head, but still holds on for dear life.
This was probably the most horrifying thing that a person can imagine, being beaten to death. Over and over again, blows raining down on your head until you lose consciousness and all hope of any survival.
Once she is subdued, the three ransack the house, looking high and low for her Social Security benefits card and anything else of value they can get their hands on.
During the beating, I believe that they were going around the house looking for the items, looking for the CDs, DVDs, and trying to find the Social Security card.
She wasn't alone as being a father and being scared. She was doing what her man asked her to do.
The card is nowhere to be found. So they make the hasty decision to burn the place down.
I guess they made a decision that they was gonna kill her.
After ransacking her apartment, Anthony directed Kaisha to burn the sheets while he went around and set the house on fire while Gregory watched.
Once they get to the point of no return, they know that they've got to go through the entire plan or risk getting caught. And if one goes down, then they all go down.
In a matter of minutes, the flames consume everything in their path.
As the fire raged throughout the house, Kaisha grabbed the duffel bag with all the items they had stolen from Melinda, and the three of them left to Anthony's mother's house.
They beat her and they put her on fire and they left.
Inside, Melinda still clings to life.
Melinda's battered and broken body was left on the floor to burn up while the house was consumed in flames around her.
And later, in Dayton, Ohio, single mother of three, Tanisha Harris, stands by her lover after he asks her to do the unthinkable.
There was blood everywhere, and she realized she had to clean it up. that it was a bloody mess.
Being the ride or die chick that she is, she immediately was going to come to the
McCormick's Pensacola apartment ablaze in a botched robbery attempt with her in it. They frantically destroy evidence that can tie them to the fiery scene.
They went to Anthony's mother's house and burned their clothes, except for the 2 camouflage jackets that the men were wearing. They disposed their shoes in a dumpster around the corner and did all of this so that they could possibly avoid detection by the police.
Caught in the moment of the crime or the behavior, they may overlook details that may come back to haunt them later on.
Back at Melinda's, a neighbor smells smoke coming out of the apartment and calls 911. The Escambia Fire Department is the first to arrive and makes a horrifying discovery. Melinda's torment had not ended with her beating.
They found the apartment engulfed in flames, and they were able to find Melinda's body inside and were able to make a determination that she was not dead at the time the fire was started.
Her death is ruled a homicide as investigators swiftly try to identify her killer.
The apartment complex had surveillance footage which showed, prior to the time of the fire being started, 3 individuals walking to her apartment. The surveillance footage also showed 3 individuals leaving that apartment.
They had on big coats, and it was like somebody was hiding something in the coat, and they was walking real fast out of the property and was looking back.
The police check with neighbors who give them valuable leads as to who the 3 perpetrators are.
Based on their frequent visits to the neighborhood, they were easily identified as being visitors to Melinda's apartment, which made them persons of interest.
Safe at home, the couple sifts through their spoils.
They were able to come up with a few items of value, DVDs, CDs, jewelry, and effects of that nature, but they were not able to find Melinda's Social Security benefits card, which was the goal of the operation.
Kaisha was led by her heart, and so things just went out of control when they didn't get what they were looking for. Now they have little or nothing to show for the murder that they committed.
The next day, detectives catch a lucky break when a friend of Melinda's comes forward with some information of his own.
Melinda's ex-boyfriend was able to identify the 3 of them.
Investigators obtain a search warrant for Anthony's mother's house, where he lives, and inside they find the 2 camo jackets similar to what the perpetrators were wearing on surveillance video.
The camouflage jackets that had DNA on it that matched Melinda, therefore tying them to the crime.
In addition to the camo jackets, police also find 2 of the perps, Anthony and Gregory, and they bring them to the station for questioning. Very quickly, they implicate Kaisha as the 3rd attacker.
Many people have their come-to-Jesus moment in the interrogation room, and all kind of secrets and stories are told to keep themselves out of trouble.
Later that day, Kaisha's arrested at her mother's house without incident.
She was very scared and crying, and they took her in. Whenever she did get arrested, she told the truth of how it happened.
The days of standing by her man are over once she sits down on the interrogation chair and starts spilling the beans.
She said that she was there, and she described the materials that they hit her with, and she gave them step by step of what happened from the beginning to end.
I think at that point she was more scared of police than she was of Anthony. And as a result, she knew that the only way that she could save her life and possibly escape the death penalty was to come clean and give Anthony up.
It's enough for investigators to charge the 3 collaborators with first-degree murder and first-degree robbery.
Once the pressure of the authorities came down on these 3, they cracked like eggs and sang like birds.
Kaisha sees no other way than to try to save herself. She takes a deal and pleads no contest to second-degree murder and arson. She tells the court that she was afraid Anthony and Gregory would kill her and her family if she did not help them.
It was a threat thing with her, and she was scared.
Based on her tumultuous relationship with Anthony, she really didn't have an out.
I believe that she was afraid of him and of what he would do to her if she didn't participate.
At sentencing, the court shows no mercy, and Kaisha receives 2 concurrent 30-year sentences. Anthony Presley pleads no contest to second-degree murder and arson and receives a total sentence of 60 years. Gregory Williams tries his luck with a jury, and they unanimously find him guilty of first-degree murder. His arson charges are dropped, and he receives a life sentence. Keisha Pugh was hoping her love and devotion would keep her close to her man, but that relationship only went up in flames. Next, Tanisha Harris tries to prove she's her man's main squeeze by getting her hands dirty for love. In Dayton, Ohio, a young Tanisha has always pushed the boundaries set by the grandmother who raised her.
Tanisha's grandmother was very protective of her, and they were Jehovah's Witness. So that meant there were restrictions on what she could wear, what she could do, and she really didn't have a life outside of that house.
And the older she gets, the harder it is to rein her in.
She began to rebel against the principles that her grandmother taught her.
Rebel against her religion and began to turn into the good girl gone bad.
By the time she's an adult, she transitions from breaking curfew to breaking the law.
When she was 22 years old, she had been in trouble for forgery. She was wanted by police for stealing a car and also illegally handling a firearm.
When children grow up in a very strict household and they get that taste of freedom, they sometimes just go buck wild because it's really new to them.
Bad behavior and several bad relationships later, Tanisha finds herself alone and the mother of 3 young children. Now a single mom, she focuses on supporting her brood any legal way she can.
Tanisha had only a high school diploma, which limited a lot of the jobs that she can get.
She was trying to turn her life around and become a better example for her 3 kids. She wanted to make sure they had a better future.
She was a cashier, she worked as a housekeeper, and even an icer at a local bakery.
Part of being a parent is learning how to put the needs of your children before your own needs. Some parents learn to do this in time. Some, it takes them a very long time. And there are some who just never learn that most valuable lesson of parenting.
With all her hard work, Tanisha's life seems to be getting back on track. But without a partner to share the burden, she finds herself increasingly lonely.
As any single parent, you're going to be busy, and when you have 3 children, that takes up all of your time pretty much.
So when 26-year-old Antoine Anderson enters the picture, she believes she can finally have her cake and eat it too.
The day she met Antoine, things changed for her. She saw a kindred spirit in him. She was quite smitten with this young man.
They soon learn that their similar experiences give them a special bond.
Antoine had an unsavory past. He had some run-ins with the law, but so did Tanisha.
He had actually been arrested about 6 times for a myriad of crimes, resulting in convictions for felonious assault and robbery. His past only draws them closer. Together, these former outlaws will kick their wild child pasts into high gear.
He called Tanisha in a frenzy and has the audacity to ask her to help clean up the crime scene.
She was going to ride with him until the wheels fell.
26-year-old Antoine Anderson bond over their criminal past.
They really wanted to work hard at building a great future together.
Opposites attract is not the only rule of thumb when it comes to love. As a matter of fact, statistics show that people who come from the same backgrounds actually do better in relationships.
Tanisha can't believe her luck when she learns that Antoine is not only handsome and charming, but likes children.
Most men would actually be scared of dating someone with multiple kids, but not Antoine.
Here's a guy who's flirtatious, who's giving her the attention she wants, and he's not bothered by the fact that she has 3 kids.
He actually relished the time that he spent with the kids. He began to take on a fatherly figure role with them and tried to spend every moment he could with Tanisha and her family.
The lonely mom has finally found a love she hopes will last forever.
Antoine seemed like a perfect catch. Her kids loved him, she loved him, and it seemed like this was the guy.
He gave her the one thing she always wanted, which was family.
But there's still one thing that he can't give her: fidelity. And she's okay with that.
Tanisha was working multiple jobs. She had 3 kids that she had to tend to. And Antoine took this as an opportunity to spend time in the bed with the side chick.
When a woman has been craving attention for some time, they're often blinded to the fact that the person they are attracted to is really bad news.
The fact that she was willing to share him with another woman showed you how desperate she was for love.
Like Tanisha, 25-year-old Nichelle McKnight also finds herself attracted to Antoine's charismatic charms.
When Tanisha was at work, Antoine would see Nichelle.
Nichelle was an Air Force reservist and single mom to a 4-year-old son named Zayden. He became a master at splitting his time between the 2 women.
Still, at the end of the day, Antoine would always come home to Tanisha.
She was willing to put up with his infidelity as long as she remained his number 1.
When a man is involved in 2 relationships, quite often there is the main one, the one that we call in street vernacular, the main squeeze. And for Antoine, Tanisha was that person. That's the one who was not only primary, but the one he didn't want to lose.
And to keep his number 1 gal completely happy, Antoine gets an idea where they can both get something out of his extracurricular love life.
Nichelle had a pretty good income, and he started to capitalize off of it, to steal her bank accounts, to steal her credit cards, and to get all of that information so he could actually siphon through and get some money.
So one day, when she wasn't looking, he walked up to her purse and grabbed her debit card. Once he got the card, he immediately gave it to Tanisha.
Tanisha was not willing to push back because she was hard up for cash. She wanted money, and this was free money. And not only was it free, it was from his side chick.
The fact that Tanisha knew that she was the main squeeze and Nichelle had no clue that Tanisha was in the picture gave Tanisha a sense of power and yet another secret that she could share with Antoine.
She and Antoine go shopping at department stores throughout Dayton and also withdraw cash to shop to their heart's content. For 2 days, the couple lives the high life, but their free ride doesn't last long.
Nichelle started to notice that she didn't have as much money in her account. She called the bank several times and was trying to figure out what was going on.
She suspects her lover might have something to do with her dwindling funds and mentions it to him. Antoine plays dumb and denies knowing anything about it.
Nichelle pretty much dropped it. She was over it.
It's possible that she believed him, but most likely she just didn't want the confrontation and was just hoping that it would just play itself out and have perhaps some sort of a good resolve.
Nichelle claims to believe him, and the two make plans to do their laundry together later that evening, until Nichelle unexpectedly calls off the date.
They were texting, and she texted him back and said, never mind, she changed her mind.
Antoine allegedly becomes unhinged.
He became alarmed when she decides to abruptly change her plans.
Antoine got paranoid and thought that Nichelle suspected him and that she would go to the police.
Not wanting to take any chances on serving more time, he decides to take matters into his own hands.
Instead of telling Tanisha that he thinks they're about to get caught, Antoine actually decides to act very quickly.
Knowing Tanisha and the kids are out of town, Antoine invites Nichelle over to Tanisha's place, since Nichelle lives with her mother. Then, he puts the next part of his plan in motion. He texts Nichelle and insists that they spend the night together.
All right, see you in a bit.
Antoine drove to Nichelle's house and waited outside for her and her son to come out. He then drove them to Tanisha's house.
Police theorize that once they arrive, Antoine leads an unsuspecting Nichelle down to the basement.
Nichelle was thinking she was there to wash clothes. As Nichelle began to unload her laundry bag, that's when Antoine made his move.
Nichelle McKnight, after stealing and using her credit cards.
So Antoine picked up Nichelle and her son and brings them over to Tanisha's house.
Her back was turned to him as she was unloading the laundry.
According to theories of the crime, this is when Antoine takes the opportunity to silence Nichelle for good.
He shot her twice in the back of the head, and she was dead instantly.
No one knows for certain what happened to Nichelle's young son, Zayden. Forensic reports suggest he met a similar fate in Tanisha's basement.
We're not sure what Antoine's involvement was in Zayden's disappearance or death, but if he did do something, then I think this really speaks more than anything to this pathological type of personality, because the bottom line is, it was an innocent child, and he didn't have to include this child in such a ghastly, horrific crime.
Antoine then goes to work, getting rid of the evidence.
He threw Nichelle's body into some trash bags, hauled it into the trunk of Tanisha's car, and then drove to the banks of a river and dumped her body under the guise of night when no one could see.
At that point, we don't know where Zayden was or what happened to him.
When the deed is done, Antoine reaches out to the one woman he knows will stand by his side.
He called Tanisha in a frenzy. He told her what happened, and he asked her to help him get rid of some of the evidence.
What? He had the nerve to commit a murder in her house, and then the audacity to call her and ask her to clean it up. She was willing to take whatever Antoine would give her. He gave her the feeling of a family unit, and with that came murder.
In many ways, he may have felt in his very warped mind that that was the least that she could do, because ultimately he was protecting her, at least in his own mind, throughout the whole series of events.
Tanisha is stunned, but she knows her man needs her.
Even though she wasn't a stranger to crime, Tanisha had never been involved in anything as serious as murder before.
She had a big choice to make. Was she willing to take that next step to be involved in this crime?
Ever the devoted girlfriend, she agrees to clean up her man's mess.
Some women in this kind of a situation may see this as being their future, their everything, and therefore now they only care about this particular family unit that they're part of, and to hell with everyone else.
Tanisha rushes home with the kids, and while they're distracted elsewhere, she does exactly what he says.
Tanisha started cleaning up the crime scene, and she did her best to make sure there was no DNA evidence or any evidence that Nichelle had been there that night.
After she finished cleaning, she gathered all of the dirty rags and any leftover evidence and threw them in trash bags. She and Anton actually got in the car, threw them in the trunk, and he disposed of them in various locations around the Dayton area.
Once they believe they're in the clear, Tanisha and Antoine go about their lives as if nothing happened. But across town, Nichelle's mother grows concerned over the sudden absence of her daughter and grandson.
4 days after Nichelle and Zayden were last seen, Nichelle's mom filed a missing persons report with Dayton police.
Police start their investigation into the mother and son's strange disappearance.
Detectives looked at Nichelle's cell phone records and noticed that the last person she talked to was Antoine.
Nichelle's mother doesn't recognize the name, so police reach out to Antoine directly by phone. He is polite and cooperative and agrees to their request for an interview. But on the scheduled day, he has other plans.
The police asked him to come in for questioning, but he never showed up. And so he became a major person of interest.
So much so, they are more eager than ever to locate him.
The police teamed up with a fugitive apprehension team, and they began tracking Antoine's moves.
One day during their surveillance, they saw Antoine actually leaving Tanisha's house. So as he was pulling out of the driveway, they began to follow him.
But Antoine soon realizes he's being tailed.
They tried to pull him over. Instead, he kept going, didn't stop, and then he jumped out of the car.
He flees on foot and refuses to be cornered.
He ran into a wooded area, and he pulled out
Aiden McKnight after leaving his girlfriend Tanisha Harris's place.
The officers tried to pull him over. He kept going, but then he pulled over, jumped out of the car, and ran through a wooded area.
It turned into a real big standoff.
Realizing there's no way out, Antoine makes one last fateful decision.
He grabbed his gun and took his own life.
26-year-old Antoine Anderson is dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head.
He took the easy way out.
It's really difficult to explain why someone would commit suicide in a situation like this. Perhaps it's survival in a surreal level. Perhaps it's a level of desperation. Perhaps it's even cowardice. But this is something that we'll never have a clear answer to.
Tanisha is crushed by the news of Antoine's death.
When she found out Antoine took his own life, she was devastated. This was her love. This was the love of her life that she was willing to do anything for. And he no longer was with her.
All of the hopes and dreams she had about their future together were immediately dashed.
Surviving a loved one's suicide is difficult enough because you have the grieving process, you have no real answers as to why that person took their own lives. So the folks that are left behind are in shock, they're grieving, they're confused. But in this particular case, you're adding insult to injury in that he left her in a predicament, a criminal predicament, and she was now on her own. She had to work it out and figure it out by herself.
The only consolation is that authorities don't know about her involvement in the crime.
Police are still investigating what happened in Nichelle and Zayden McKnight's disappearance.
And it's only a matter of time before investigators connect the dots.
Police were able to see that her credit card had been stolen and used, and they were able to tie that back to Tanisha.
It's enough to arrest the single mom for some serious crimes.
Tanisha was charged in connection to Nichelle's credit card being stolen and being used.
Tanisha pleads no contest to 8 counts of theft. She's ordered to pay restitution back to the bank of almost $3,000, and she is sentenced to 10 months in prison. Tanisha's now where they can keep an eye on her, but investigators suspect she knows more.
With Antoine out of the picture, now Tanisha is the only suspect associated with Nichelle's disappearance.
She denies any involvement in the crime and is not charged. But with her recent plea, police have enough probable cause to search Tanisha's property, including the trunk of her car and basement. There, they find traces of blood consistent with the DNA profiles of both Nichelle and Zayden. And things go from bad to worse when Nichelle's body turns up several days later.
A passerby notices a body at the Stillwater River, and it is that of Nichelle McKnight. So this case quickly turns from a missing person incident to a homicide.
But neither she nor Antoine are officially charged with Nichelle's murder. Faced with the overwhelming evidence, Tanisha confesses to her role in helping clean up after the murder.
Her attorney claims that she was frightened of what could happen to her had she gone to the police and told.
Tanisha swears she has no idea what happened to little Zayden.
She's even offered to do a lie detector test.
To this day, Zayden's body has never been found. Neither Tanisha nor Antoine have been charged with a crime surrounding Zayden's disappearance. His case is still open.
There's a lot of unanswered questions still in this case, and things that we'll never know because Antoine isn't here to answer those questions. And the main question is, what happened to Zayden? Where is he? And that's what people want to know.
It's tough enough when a child is gone or missing or even killed. But when we don't know what happened to the child and that child is just thrown into the unknown, we don't have that closure, well, it makes it so much worse.
In connection with Nichelle's murder, Tanisha Harris is convicted of tampering with evidence, 2 counts of gross abuse to a corpse, and failure to report a crime. She is sentenced to 3 years in prison. Tonisha pinned her hopes and dreams for the future on a man who loved himself more than he loved her.
She protected him in a way. She helped to clean up the crime scene. She didn't report it to police.
Her biggest mistake was doing everything Antoine asked her to, from using somebody else's money to helping to commit a crime, to even sharing the relationship with another woman. There was nothing Tanisha was not.
DJ referred to him as his brother, even though they're not actually related.
They grew up together in West Hartford, went to Hall High School.
You find one, you find the other. I observed a tan Honda Accord parked, the doors open.
You could see blood where their victims were in the front seats when they were shot.
He never saw the shooter. He claims that he didn't know who shot them.
Alarm bells are going off in their head. This might be a retaliation.
There was one young man who really had this expectation of himself to do what was right and avenge the death of his good friend.
That's when everything went wrong.
It's just a few days before Christmas in the capital city of Hartford, Connecticut.
It's a historic city. It's a city that used to be the richest in the U.S. There is a lot of diversity here. It's rich with culture, the arts.
Hartford is a super diverse community. You have many Latinos, Puerto Ricans, South American, Central American. You have Bosnians. You have a large Albanian community. It's just African American, Asians, Laotians, you name it, we have it in Hartford.
Saturday, December 20th, 2014. Around 5:30 in the morning, a resident of the apartment building near Colt Park is startled by a loud noise.
She sees a man. He's clutching his arm. The person is bleeding profusely. He's obviously in a lot of pain. He gets inside that building and he collapses on the stairwell.
She let him use her cell phone to call 911.
She stays with the man until EMTs and officers with the Hartford Police Department arrive.
That's where he started getting medical treatment by EMS.
He is shot in the shoulder and through the elbow.
Did they know the shooter? He did not want to say who shot him. He did not want to say anything.
Responding officers learned the man's name.
Dedrick Jimenez. DJ is his nickname.
24-year-old DJ says he was shot not far from the apartment building.
He was in his brother's car when he was shot.
DJ reveals that his brother, 23-year-old Hiram Martinez, is still in the car, and he was also shot.
His brother's car is down the street. You can almost see where the vehicle was from where he was.
Investigators find a man slumped over the center console. They can see pretty quickly he's been shot at the back of the head.
Despite the wound, Hiram still has a pulse.
He is transported to the hospital. They're still working on him.
DJ Jimenez and Hiram Martinez weren't born brothers, but came to think of each other as such by way of an intense friendship that began when they were young.
They grew up together in West Hartford, went to Hall High School. People think, well, Hartford, West Hartford, same thing, but very, very different. West Hartford has a smaller town, yet urban feel to it.
DJ referred to him as his brother. He'd call Hiram his brother, even though they're not actually related, they were close friends.
They had a fast friendship and an enduring one. They went through a lot of life together, from their boyhood to their teen years to their adult years.
As a teen, Hiram dreamed of becoming a race car mechanic. But that dream didn't pan out. When he was 20, Hiram and his girlfriend became parents to a baby girl. On December 20th, 2014, both Hiram and DJ are on their way to Hartford Hospital after suffering gunshot wounds during an early morning attack. As the men receive medical care, detectives arrive at the apartment building near the 100-acre Colt Park.
It's an area that's usually full of happy times and families and sporting events. But on this occasion, on this day, police tape is surrounding the scene.
I was asked to respond to the crime scene and assume the role as the lead investigator.
Along with Detective Richter, siblings Anthony and Mike Rakowski are also on the case.
My brother is my twin, so to be able to work with him on such, high responsibility cases is it's really an amazing thing. He brings a certain view to the table, a little bit different than mine sometimes, and we bounce back and forth off each other, and it makes for a much more well-rounded investigation.
Detectives begin their investigation in the stairwell where DJ took refuge.
We're trying to get as much information as possible as quickly as we can. So just went over there, saw what was there, which is a little blood and, some EMS equipment that they used to treat him, and then just backtracked. So I just started walking from there back towards the vehicle.
They examined the car, where the second victim, Hiram, was found.
I observed the doors open, 2 doors open.
You could see blood. You could see kind of where the victims were in the front seats when they were shot.
Hiram Martinez had been seated in the front passenger seat, and DJ was the operator of the vehicle.
That leads investigators to an important conclusion about where the shots came from.
So Hiram shot in the back of the head, and then Dedrick is shot in the shoulder and through the elbow. And if you imagine a Honda Accord, with a center console and the driver sitting in the driver position, that's consistent with being shot from the back seat. The shooter's in the back seat.
It appears likely to investigators that DJ and Hiram knew the person who shot them.
We didn't really find any shell casings outside the car. I think we maybe found a cigarette butt outside the car. We don't know if that was connected.
Investigators will have to wait for a warrant to conduct a detailed search of the vehicle. With the crime scene giving up few clues, detectives head to Hartford Hospital to speak with the victims.
They have to start figuring out why. What's the motive? Why did someone want to hurt or potentially kill both of these men? They go to the hospital. That's where DJ has had successful surgery on his shoulder and elbow. He's got permanent rods put in both.
Detectives learned that the man DJ called his brother is not so lucky.
Hiram Martinez, he died later at the hospital. We had a homicide.
Detectives speak with DJ, who is still claiming to know nothing about the attack.
We're trying to get as much information as possible as quickly as we can. He gave us bits and pieces.
The initial information he provided was, I don't want to say misleading, but it was not complete. He initially provides information that he never saw the shooter. He claims that he didn't know who shot them, that he was in a vehicle. He took off running.
Witnesses don't want to be witnesses. People are scared. They don't want to be the one that snitches.
No one wants to be, considered a snitch.
Investigators share with DJ that his beloved brother and best friend, Hiram, has died.
When he finds out that Hiram Martinez, his childhood best friend, is dead, that's when everything changed.
He started giving information about who the person was.
Now that DJ's willing to talk, investigators are all ears. And it turns out DJ has a lot to say.
The individual who shot them goes by the street name Paul.
In Hartford, Connecticut, police are investigating an early morning double shooting just days before Christmas in 2014. 24-year-old DJ Jimenez survived wounds to the shoulder and arm. His best friend, 23-year-old Hiram Martinez, was not as fortunate.
He's been shot at the back of the head, and he is pronounced dead.
After learning of his best friend's death, DJ cooperates with detectives. He says he knows who fired the shots.
That was when DJ provided the information that an individual he knows as Papone was the person who shot him.
It was someone he met during a stint in prison. Both were on parole.
DJ tells detectives he and Hiram ran into Papone the night before.
DJ says that he was out, and that's when Hiram and Papone have time together themselves.
DJ tells detectives that when he came back, Papone's mood was starkly different.
His whole disposition changed. He wasn't talkative anymore. He knew something was wrong or something was off with this guy.
Everything seemed to be fine, but now something has changed drastically. He explains to investigators something wasn't right. He didn't know what at the time.
According to DJ, Hiram pulled him aside a few moments later. He claimed that Papone became upset when Hiram started talking about another crime, one that took place about a week prior.
Hiram had actually somewhat bragged at the fact that he had killed Mariano Gonzalez on Bond Street to Papone.
Investigators interviewing DJ immediately recognized the crime DJ is referring to.
When they're hearing DJ say this, now alarm bells are going off in their head. We might have a payback. This might be a retaliation.
My brother was assigned as the lead investigator in that case. I was called in to assist. December 14th, 2014, we had patrol officers dispatched to the area. It was about almost 2 a.m. on the report of shots fired and then another call of a person shot. Officers went out to the scene. At that time, they located a victim with a gunshot wound to the head. He was pronounced deceased on scene.
The victim was 37-year-old Mariano Gonzalez.
This crime scene was fairly limited in size in the sense that it was contained to really the driveway and the street immediately in front of there. There wasn't too much for evidence at that scene other than the deceased himself. Once the initial photographs are done, and then we can kind of roll the deceased over to get a better look at him, we discovered that he had a cell phone in his pocket and he had ammunition, rifle caliber ammunition.
When investigators questioned onlookers at the scene, they learned that one woman witnessed the actual shooting.
She heard an argument outside. She heard some foul language, caused her to look out the window, and she sees the suspect shoot our victim one time. The victim falls. She sees him shoot a second time. After he shot a second time, the suspect goes through, by her account, goes through the victim's pockets. She believed he took a watch off of his wrist. As the suspect stood up, he then kicked the victim in the face and then ran away. She described him as thin, right, very thin. He was shorter than the victim.
When detectives broke the news of Mariano's death to his family, they hoped they might also uncover a lead.
It's a huge priority for us to open up that line of communication with family and implore them to actually give us information.
But instead, Mariano's brother flew into a rage.
The brother was very aggressive, like very, very aggressive. I understand he's grieving, you know, people process that differently. So we kind of let him be. The brother shut the door on us. Like, we're done, we're not talking to you. So we didn't really get anywhere as far as establishing a timeline there or any cooperation with family. The major challenge initially was the victim's family's lack of cooperation.
They didn't want anything to do with it, I guess because of the fear of retaliation. And you find out a lot of people don't want to get involved.
Eventually, investigators did gain access to Mariano's cell phone.
We were able to take one of the last phone numbers that had made contact with the victim and link that to Hiram Martinez. The contact, if I recall, was about 30 minutes prior to the calls for the shots fired.
Hiram also matched the description of the shooter given by the woman who witnessed the crime.
And now we have eyewitnesses giving us a description of a person consistent with Hiram Martinez. It's really starting to point towards Hiram Martinez. We're still far away from calling him a suspect. He's just someone that we want to talk to.
But before detectives could question Hiram, he too was gunned down. Back at Hartford Hospital, Hiram's best friend, DJ, tells investigators that Hiram bragged about shooting Mariano to the man who eventually shot both him and Hiram.
According to DJ, Hiram told Pepone that he killed Mariano.
We immediately suspected that there was a connection to the original Bond Street case.
Police in Hartford, Connecticut are investigating the shooting death of 23-year-old Hiram Martinez. They believe his death could be related to a shooting that claimed the life of Mariano Gonzalez just 6 days before. A killing that Hiram was suspected of carrying out.
Although we suspected that, we don't fixate on that because it's very easy to fixate on an avenue like that and then you overlook a second potential suspect. We've seen commonly that people have multiple adversaries and multiple avenues of people that want to harm them. So, although we believed it wholeheartedly, we had to remain open-minded.
So far, the only person investigators can count on for information is the sole surviving victim of the second shooting, DJ Jimenez. As DJ recovers in a local hospital, detectives continue to press him for details.
He told us bits and pieces through multiple interviews. We met with Mr. Jimenez several times, different detectives, myself, to try to piece together what occurred. This happened over a course of a few interviews.
Over time, DJ expands on what happened when Pepone's mood had changed that night at the club, after Hiram had bragged about shooting Mariano.
It's getting late, and clearly the fun is starting to feel like it's over. Pepone's not in a good mood.
They were leaving, and Pepone had asked them to give him a ride to his girlfriend's house.
They didn't want to give him a ride. Eventually, reluctantly, I guess they did give him a ride.
DJ explains he was driving with Pepone in the back and Hiram in the passenger seat. Pepone said he needed some cigarettes. They stopped at a convenience store.
Pepone wants Martinez to get the cigarettes. Martinez doesn't want to get the cigarettes. The bantering and the arguing is going on. Finally, DJ says, I'll get the cigarettes. He goes into the convenience store. He comes out with the cigarettes. Now, supposedly, they're on their way.
Then, Pepone requested another stop. This time so he could relieve himself. He tells DJ to pull over near Cold Park.
They pull up next to a grassy knoll on the outside of the park, and Pepone gets out. DJ tells investigators that he can see Pepone. And Pepone
In Great Britain,
is
there are over
not so far
31
away, but
million
he's on his
licensed
cell phone.
cars on the road.
And he watches him on his cell phone.
And many more
probably
if he
doesn't
wants,
think too much
thanks
of
to
it,
an
waits for
attack
him
of
to
the
get back to the
clones.
car.
Reports of car cloning have quadrupled in
Shortly
recent
thereafter, he
years,
gets back in the
making it
vehicle,
one of the
and
fastest
that's when
growing crimes.
Jimenez hears a loud bang. covers his ears. He realizes it's a gunshot.
Cloaks
Gets out of the
were placed
car,
put on
starts running.
vehicles to hide their identity so that the police can't identify who they are, driving around about their business without being recognised. That can go for anything from someone who's not insured.
For investigators, it raises concern that the cycle of retaliation might continue. That leaves them with a burning question. Who is Papone?
Street names are street names. They can be used by anybody.
Detectives know they need to ID Papone quickly before the bloodshed continues.
We don't want to see retaliatory violence. Anytime we have a crime of violence like this, we are very concerned about retaliation. A lot of times we see family members or close friends of victims, if they hear a name, whether it's true or not, they want to go retaliate.
Investigators aren't the only ones who are worried.
This was a crime 5 days before Christmas. The crime on Bond Street was just a week prior. This was something that really rocked the Hartford community. This was yet another homicide in a city reeling from way more than their fair share. This was something that people who lived in the area were stunned by. They were startled, they were shaken, they were scared.
Detectives hunker down, focused on finding Papone's true identity.
We will take those street names and we'll enter them into certain databases that we have, or we ask, DOC contacts, probation contacts, anybody who's familiar with somebody utilizing this street name.
We just had his nickname, and we were able to identify who he was through, our channels with the Department of Correction, because he uses that nickname, Papone, before.
We were able to take the street name information obtained from DJ. We were able to determine that Papone was, in fact, Tyrone Rosa.
To make sure they have the right guy, investigators show DJ a photo lineup.
We created a photo array. In that array, it contains our potential suspect as well as individuals who look similar.
It didn't take any time at all for DJ to say, that's him.
He did make a positive ID of Tyrone Rosa as being the person that was in the car.
In Hartford, Connecticut, detectives believe they're getting closer to finding the killer of Hiram Martinez, after Hiram's best friend, DJ, identifies Tyrone Rosa as the gunman.
After we identified Papone, or Tyrone Rosa, we just started doing a workup, a background on him to figure out where he lives, all this pertinent information.
Before they attempt to bring him in for questioning, detectives do some digging on Tyrone. They learn he was close with the murder victim, Mariano Gonzalez, and his brother, the man who'd flown into a rage in front of police upon learning of Mariano's death.
He knew Mariano, but the relationship that Papone had with his brother was far deeper than investigators first realized. They found out later, via social media, that this was someone that Papone cared deeply about. He said he loved him, he would die for him.
But investigators speculate that Hiram had no idea the man he was socializing with at the club was so close to a man he claimed to have killed.
Tyrone and Mariano Gonzalez's brother and Mariano Gonzalez were actually friends. We don't believe that Hiram knew that when he was bragging about that homicide.
Tyrone may have wanted to retaliate because Hiram Martinez admitted to killing the brother of one of his closest friends.
Investigators also learned that the 35-year-old Tyrone Rosa is no stranger to the law.
He was on parole, which is great for us because that gives us access for an interview. And that's what we did. We ended up having his parole officer bring him up to the Major Crimes Division for an interview.
17 days after Hiram and DJ were shot, Tyrone Rosa is brought in for questioning with detectives, grudgingly.
He didn't seem nervous, per se. He definitely seemed very closed off and reluctant to speak. He was keeping his cards close to his chest.
Detectives keep at it.
We started getting to the meat of it, asking him if he knew certain people, if he was at an after-hours club with them. He, seemed reluctant to speak, but then he started giving us some information, saying he was at an after-hours club with Mr. Martinez and Mr. Jimenez.
At this point, the story is starting to line up a little bit with DJ's, but this is where the story changes.
Tyrone claims he didn't leave the club with DJ and Hiram.
He said he never went with them in the vehicle, that he stayed at the after-hours club, and they left by themselves. When I knew he was lying, that's a good sign, actually, for me. I like when people lie in an interview. You know you're getting close.
As for the victim of the first shooting, Mariano Gonzalez, Tyrone says he had no reason to avenge that death.
He said that he doesn't really know the other victim, which was Mr. Gonzalez, and his brother, kind of downplayed. He said he knew of them, didn't really associate with them. He kept trying to downplay his association with the victim.
Investigators aren't buying it.
He didn't really want to admit that he was really close friends with him. We knew he was close friends with his brother. That's our belief for why this occurred.
Speculation isn't enough to bring murder charges, but investigators do find a way to keep Tyrone behind bars.
Because Mr. Rosa was on parole at the time, and he was a suspect in a homicide, his parole was violated, so he's remanded to custody.
Investigators keep close tabs on Tyrone. The day after his arrest, he makes a phone call from jail to Mariano's brother.
We already said he wasn't close to him, so why are you calling this guy if you don't really associate with him? So that, obviously, we knew he was lying.
That's not all. He asked Mariano's brother for a favor.
He also started telling this guy to destroy his phone, which is like, if you have no involvement in it, why are you telling someone to destroy their phones?
In late December 2014, police in Hartford, Connecticut are holding Tyrone Rosa in connection with the shooting death of 23-year-old Hiram Martinez. Detectives believe that Tyrone killed Hiram in retaliation for the death of his friend, Mariano Gonzalez.
He denied shooting Mr. Jimenez or Mr. Martinez. He said, I never went with them to the car.
But the day after Tyrone is taken into custody, he makes a jailhouse phone call to Mariano's brother, requesting that he tell a man named CL to destroy his phone. Investigators want to know why. They track down CL.
He was on probation for a gun arrest, so we interviewed him at his probation office.
CL admits he was with Tyrone that night.
He's friends with Tyrone Rosa, and he was with Mr. Rosa at the After Hours Club prior to the incident.
Eventually, Tyrone left the club.
He just went, didn't know where he went. Mr. Rosa didn't tell him.
Then, around 5:30 a.m., minutes after the shooting would have taken place, CL called Tyrone to ask him where he had gone. Tyrone didn't say, but asked CL to pick him up at a location near Colt Park.
He went and picked him up near the crime scene. I don't even think he knew what Mr. Rosa did, because I asked him all that and he just picked him up and was doing him a favor.
CL's statement appears to contradict what Tyrone told detectives.
Mr. Rosa denied, obviously, being in that car, so if you weren't in that car, you're not being picked up by the crime scene. We found the guy who picked him up by the crime scene.
In order to charge Tyrone with murder, investigators need more. They need evidence. They hope the vehicle in which Hiram and DJ were shot might give them just that.
We obtain a search warrant to process that car. The crime scene division will process it, and they'll look for all different kinds of physical evidence: DNA, fingerprints, shell casings, firearms, anything that's in there that we ask them to look for. They found a fingerprint on the inside rear door handle, which it's actually pretty rare to get a usable fingerprint. But they did recover a fingerprint, and that print later did hit to Tyrone Rosa.
Now they know what he told them about not being anywhere near the crime scene, not still being in the car, was not true. They placed Tyrone at the scene of the murder.
Though it doesn't prove he pulled the trigger, the fingerprint is the final piece of evidence investigators need to bring Tyrone Rosa one important step closer to justice.
With that positive ID, with the physical evidence to support it, that was enough.
At this point, the lead investigator will take all this information and compile it into an arrest warrant, and that's exactly what he did.
On February 18th, 2015, nearly 2 months after Hiram Martinez and DJ Jimenez were shot, Tyrone Rosa is charged with murder, first-degree assault, and criminal gun possession.
Mr. Rosa was arrested for the murder of one gentleman, assault on another gentleman.
He was already remanded to custody because he was on parole, so he's in jail already.
But will prosecutors be able to keep him there?
Throughout the court proceedings, he maintained his innocence. He said, "Someone killed him, but it wasn't me."
On February 2nd, 2015, in Hartford Superior Court, Tyrone Rosa goes on trial for the murder of Hiram Martinez and the assault of DJ Jimenez. In court, Tyrone is stoic.
He was very calm and didn't seem nervous or excited. He's kind of a low energy type of guy.
Prosecutors argue that Tyrone was out for revenge after Hiram told him that he killed Mariano Gonzalez.
The claim was that Mr. Rosa had killed this one gentleman for revenge for a friend of his that had been killed. My client gave a very different version. There was this unknown third person who my client says put a gun to his head and presumably committed the shooting.
There was one young man who really had this expectation of himself to do what was right or what was considered the admirable thing to do and avenge the death of his good friend, his friend's brother. There's no alternative other than to take the same lethal action that was used against the person that he loved.
DJ takes the stand as the state's star witness. He walks the jury through details of Mariano's murder, according to what Hiram told him.
Hiram met up with Mariano Gonzalez on Bond Street in Hartford. He was supposed to buy a gun. DJ says, changed his mind. Now Hiram doesn't want to buy the gun. Mariano was basically set on selling this gun. You're buying this gun. And that's when everything went wrong.
Mariano Gonzalez had actually threatened Hiram Martinez's family.
Hiram has a 3-year-old child and a significant other that clearly he cared about very much. So when someone threatened to wipe out his family, this did not sit the right way. DJ says that's when Hiram told him that he killed Mariano Gonzalez in cold blood.
A week later at the club, when Tyrone Rosa learned that Hiram killed Mariano, Tyrone then set his sights on Hiram. On the stand, DJ recalls the chilling moment that claimed his best friend's life.
Tyrone got out to use the bathroom. They didn't think anything of that, and as he got back in the car, DJ claims he heard a loud bang, covered his ears, realized it was a shooting, got out and ran. At that point, he realized he had been shot as well.
As the defense gets underway, Tyrone Rosa takes the stand.
He admitted to lying to police, and the reason why he lied was because he was on parole and didn't want his parole remanded.
Tyrone admits he did drive around with DJ and Hiram that night.
The police found my client's fingerprints in the car. My client didn't dispute having been in the car. Everybody agreed that he had been in the car. The question was he the shooter?
But Tyrone insists he was not.
There was no forensic evidence that directly tied my client to the shooting. They didn't find the murder weapon, for example. They didn't find any DNA on anything that directly linked my client to the murder. So the lack of that sort of evidence made the trial a credibility contest.
Tyrone offers up what he claims is the truth about what happened that night.
My client testified that while he was urinating, somebody came up behind him, put a gun to his head, and told him, "Don't move. This isn't about you." And then he heard a couple gunshots. Went back to the car where the deceased and Mr. Jimenez were, saw that the deceased had been shot, and took off running.
He basically denied being the person to pull the trigger, and he said it was somebody else who he couldn't identify who was responsible for the murder. He didn't provide any information as far as description or who might have been the person who did this.
Once all the testimony was heard in court, it was up to the jurors to decide this case. It didn't take them long before they came back, and on February 14th, their verdict was guilty.
At sentencing, Tyrone shows no remorse and continues to claim innocence.
And to this day, he's still saying that he's innocent.
The judge sees things differently.
He spoke of the senseless cycle of violence, the tragic nature in which a domino effect happened with these crimes that led to a payback. And Tyrone Rosa was about to pay.
Mr. Rosa was sentenced to 55 years for the murder of Mr. Martinez, and he got an additional 15 years for shooting Mr. Jimenez.
For investigators, this was a relief. They had a conviction. Tyrone Papone Rosa. But remember, there were two crimes here. The payback was preceded by the murder of Mariano Gonzalez.
There was a witness that, in fact, saw the shooter go through the victim's pockets. DNA testing was done from the victim's pockets, and the recovery...
Đầu anh thì đầu anh xem đi. Mẹ lại thêm một ngày ức chế. Khỏi ăn lẩu nữa. Thế đại là không làm lẩu sữa nữa. Mà chúng làm liên quan gì nữa. Thế mà tí làm cái đâu? Ai biết, nếu mà chơi đâu. Đi chả đá này, nhà chị Hương ấy, xem gặp nó với cả Nghiêm, trông 203 chồng vô công rồi nghề vậy. 203 năm nay bao nhiêu tuổi nhỉ? 21 tuổi à? Có tí với anh Đại. 21 tuổi. Thật ơi trông nhớ mắt vậy. Kiểu nhà trả vô công người nghề trả làm được cái gì? Chuyện gì? Vẫn bác cảnh. Chị Quỳnh đi nước ngoài giữ nguyên được nhỉ? Kiểu giữ nguyên một người rất lâu ấy. Nên tao phải tranh chấp như này đâu. Đéo gì lúc đấy bố em Lúc đấy nhá, kiểu có bố của cái đứa Thảo không? Phương Thảo lên đi. Thế xong lúc bố em về xong mấy người đấy bảo là bố em lên làm trưởng đúng không? Thế xong bố em làm xong mẹ nhà đấy gặp em bên ngoài còn chửi em á. Má
Chửi đéo gì? Má
ê
chửi.
còn khịa kiểu thế xong cứ khịa khịa như thế xong em tức vãi, em chửi mẹ lại luôn. Em đấu khẩu 11 xong từ lần đấy mình đéo dám nói gì nữa ấy. Xong cứ kiểu khịa khịa là kiểu chuyện là bố em lên xong các thứ ấy. Thế con mẹ Toàn ấy cay vãi đái. Mẹ mà lúc đấy mình mới lớp mấy nhỉ? 8 à? Hay lớp 9? Thế là mẹ em bảo là làm nốt gì đấy nghỉ luôn. Cả nhiều hôm làm rạp ấy.
Bận mà.
Bận vãi xong lại phải lên nhạc thỏ. Mà chủ nhật nào chả phải lên. Thế là mẹ em không cho đi nữa. Bắt ở nhà. Kiểu vượng thật. Nhà đấy kiểu người tranh chấp. Kiểu chả hiểu sao cái trước đấy có cái gì mà phải drama như thế luôn ý.
Mình sẽ chuyển sang tô cái phần lông ở trên phần cổ của chú yêu cao cổ này nha. Mình sẽ tô màu nâu vào đây.
Vãi bàn 170 này, trông chắc chắn không?
Chẳng biết vậy. Mờ. Gì? Ở mức à? Không phải khác
Anh thằng này được tắt cái trạng thái hoạt động. Cút!
Mỗi ngày nhớ một em sợ.
Vãi thằng này cho em vào trạng thái hoạt động luôn này Thảo ơi. Thằng này tắt trạng thái hoạt động luôn em cho mẹ vào trong.
Biết đâu nó hạn chế mày không thấy thì sao?
Không phải đâu, hạn chế nó không kiểu hiện vào tin nhắn ở cái trang cá nhân này đâu. Hay là máy tính nó không hiện. Kiểm tra thử điện thoại. Ở mức quá, tao cho mày vào hạn chế trước. À quên, mình tắt trạng thái hoạt động của điện thoại mà. Lại phải bật à?
Mình sẽ tô cái màu vàng nhạt vào phần lỗ tai của chú hươu cao cổ này nhá.
Ê, nó tắt thật Nghị Thảo ơi.
Nghị ơi.
Thằng này mày chết thì tao cho mẹ mày vào hạn chế.
Anh cẩn thận đấy.
Người yêu rồi đến đấy cũng hóa chia tay thôi.
Gì em chặn anh sao em phải đánh?
Em chia tay nhá.
Ôi chia làm gì để rồi lại phải quay lại.
Em bảo em chia tay đi. Hãng vãi. Không bỏ hạn chế không được này. À đấy. Mẹ nuôi năm nay muốn chừng mình.
Ngứa đít. Thằng khác mà.
Giờ chạy KPI rồi. Ê thằng Đồng cứ nhắn tin em liên tục ấy.
Ok Đồng.
Thôi.
Rồi dã man quá.
Lại phải đi chơi với Đồng rồi.
Anh đang làm phiền em đấy.
Sao anh làm phiền em?
Phiền em với thằng khác.
Anh làm phiền.
Thì anh.
Để anh làm phiền.
Sao lại chưa gửi nhỉ?
Đến 1 giờ nhá.
Mẹ em này, thằng vô liêm sỉ. Anh nói gì? Anh há mồm anh nói lại em xem nào.
Không, anh nói gì đâu em.
Để em giải tội online cho anh. Mình đang sửa lốt cái phần da, cái phần lông này của chú hươu cao cổ là đã sắp xong rồi nha.